Good evening. Time being shortly after 7 o'clock, I'll call the January 30th meeting of the Joint Budget Subcommittee to order. Please pause for a moment of silence. Thank you, and since we hadn't asked for a flag, I can't ask you to stand to do the pledge because the flag isn't here. So we will, tonight's meeting is the first of 6 listening sessions. And the reason we called them listening sessions is because these are meetings that we want to hear from you. We want to hear what your questions are, what your concerns are, and try and answer those questions as best we can at this stage of the budget process and as we move forward. But this is the first of 6. The 6 are all posted online. There's one at the high school, a couple at the senior center. So these are ongoing. We're looking for input from the community. The reasons that we've gone out to these different places to have them is trying to engage different sections of the community. So that's what we're here for this evening. And to start, I'd like the town administrator just to give a quick overview of the budget update.
Sure. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome everybody. And I know, just so everybody knows, this is being live streamed on YouTube at home. There are some packets in the back. I know we made about 60 copies. Hopefully everybody got one. If you didn't, just share it. And just for folks watching at home or that are here, if you do go to franklinma.gov, go to the FY26 budget section, or you can go to tonight's calendar, you can go to tonight's packet, and all of the refreshed model is there. Very quickly, if you read through the 8-page memo, the revised model includes some significantly updated numbers, some very, very important numbers that have just come out that we've been waiting all fall for. Going in based on the assumptions that are in this model, which are pretty strong as of we move forward. The structural budget deficit currently stands at about $3.6 million. And just for anybody that wasn't paying attention last year that may be watching at home, the town used just over $3 million last year in one-time money. So the one-time money that was in the FY25 budget this current year, that budget deficit has grown just by about $500,000, which is actually, given all the circumstances we're facing, both the town and the schools and the state of Massachusetts, that's actually pretty good. It doesn't feel good and it doesn't sound good, but actually given all the circumstances where we were a couple months ago, that's actually better news than where we were in October, November, or December. So very quickly, for the folks at home and those in the audience, the most important unknown revenue that was that we now know is state aid from the governor's budget. For people that don't know, every city or town uses what we call House 1, which is Governor Healy's budget that she filed on January 22nd. Every city or town uses that local aid number as their foundation of their budget moving forward. It has always been like that in Franklin. It has always been like that in every city or town. Everyone waits. And that's why for a lot of people, we couldn't answer a lot of questions through the fall. And that's why you don't see a lot of budget deliberations in many communities in the fall, because you can't really move forward and know what's going on without knowing what the governor's budget's going to be. So local aid did come in lower than what we had projected in early budget models. We had projected about a 1.5% increase, and the governor's revenue was at about 1.25%. So not too bad. We were pretty close. Some had said at the budget debates in this fall we should budget for 1%. Some said 2%. Some said 1.5%. So actually, it's right there, pretty much in the middle. But what I encourage again, all of you, you cannot just look at Chapter 70 as a standalone number. So when the governor puts out $75 per pupil, and the governor and lieutenant governor say that's the highest amount any governor has ever proposed, that's a great talking point. But it does not tell the whole story. You also need to look at state assessments of what you have to pay back. And that biggest piece of that state assessment is relative to what the town has to pay back to the charter school for the amount of students. That's the way the Chapter 70 formula works. For those of you that are budget nerds and know all this, I'm sorry to repeat it, but for those of you who are new to this, I just want to make sure it's clear. You cannot just look at the Chapter 70 per pupil increase and celebrate. You have to also look at the full cherry sheet. So in the aggregate, based on the model that we had put out in December, when you look at the totality of the model, we actually saw an increase of $272,000. Why? Because Tri-County and some of the other actually has a lower enrollment, so we actually gain revenue on our local aid number from that. And then there are some other pieces of the formula relative to things like mosquito control and charter school assessments and a whole variety of other things that are in state law. So it's always really important for any of you looking, and you can go on the state website and look at all of the cherry sheets. They're called cherry sheets. That's what every budget director, that's what every school business administrator waits for every year, is the cherry sheet. And we implemented the entire cherry sheet into the budget. And based on the budget earlier this year that we had put out, we saw a $272,000 increase. It's not a lot, but it is definitely better than what we thought in the fall. So that's all good news. Second, local receipts is, I won't go into the whole detail. I know many people here have read it before. I have assumed, based on local receipt data, which is mostly revenues that are generated by the municipal departments through ambulance receipts, recreation receipts, licensing fees, permitting, motor vehicle excise tax. I got a whole list in here. We go through it every year at the Finance Committee, and I look at the December 31st Q2 report. I will also look at it at the end of March for Q3 to make sure our assumptions are solid. But the good news is that Franklin, or people outside of Franklin, ate out a lot in December in the town of Franklin. I'm not kidding you. We saw literally over a $200,000 increase alone in meals tax. And as I joked the other night at the Finance Committee, that is not just a cheeseburger and fries. That is a lot of martinis as well. And so good news is that our excise taxes are strong, our hotel taxes are strong. The permitting staff and the fire chief and the fire department, the recreation director, there are literally dozens upon dozens upon dozens of categories. All of those revenues are very, very strong, and so I'm upping the assumption $1 million in the budget model, which is excellent, excellent, excellent news. I have decreased new growth a slight amount back to the assumption of 1.1 million, so there's a small decrease there. And that really has to do with the general commercial, industrial, and residential home improvement schedule, which we don't see any real signs yet of where we're going to come back to pre-pandemic levels on new growth. I know that Councilor Frangillo and Councilor Hamlin, I will give them a plug for their 9 series, I believe, podcast on new growth. If people are concerned about development in Franklin, they should listen to those. They've both done an excellent, excellent job on that. I know it's on Franklin Matters and Franklin TV, Steve, I believe. Please inform yourself about new growth. Commercial development in town, residential development in town, and home improvement in town all matters a lot to that revenue source. Before the pandemic, our new growth was about 1.8 million. It has now gone down a third to about 1.1 million since that time. And that has a lot to do with interest rates, development markets, and yes, it does have to do with the fact that in a lot of cases, a lot of residents do not want a lot more development. That hurts new growth, that hurts the revenue source there. It's not a huge amount, but it's still come down a little bit. We have decreased the health insurance assumption from 18.5% down to 14.5%. Those numbers are not final yet, but we are moving in the right direction, and our loss runs are still bad as a community, but they are improving a slight bit. I will say this budget model also incorporates into the budget all of the town municipal department budget requests. They were due on December 30th. Those are now incorporated into this model. And it does include, on behalf of the school district, a level service budget of $80.4 million, which is a $2.9 million increase over last year, which is 3.8%. I will also remind everybody, in the past, look at the historical presentations. The school department in the last 8 years has never gotten just a 2.5%. In fact, last year it was a 7%. Most of the other years are 3 to 4%. Other than the 2020 and 2021, which were in the 1 to 2s, which because of the pandemic and a lot of federal aid filled those, the school budget has always been between 3 to 4%. And so I know there's a lot of misinformation out there on this issue. We start the budget process at 2.5%. But by the time the budget is actually approved by the council in May, it is never at 2.5%. It is always far greater than that. So based on all those assumptions, we're at a $3.63 million deficit. And the last thing I'll say is, or last two things, these are not final yet. As the Joint Budget Subcommittee folks have said throughout the whole year, we are walking the entire community through the budget process step by step. So what we said in September has vastly evolved to now. And the budget over the next 7 weeks while these listening sessions are going on are going to continue to evolve. The superintendent and I meet every 2 weeks. We work on this stuff together with our finance teams. And so I just want to make sure everybody's clear. 3.6 is the structural budget deficit as of today, and that is a very plausible number. But I still think that deficit could go down a little bit. That deficit could go up a little bit, based off what we will usually do by the beginning of March. As most people probably know, I usually do a presentation a month and a half before I file the town administrator's budget in mid to late April by town charter. These numbers still will shift a little bit, but the community can, I think, have a very healthy discussion based off the 3.7 million number. The last thing I want to mention on page 4 of the memo, these numbers that I just mentioned in that deficit does not include the savings from the closure of Parmenter School in the municipal budget. So we estimate roughly 300 to 400,000 in savings just on the closure of Parmenter. But as many of you know, I have not included that in there for two reasons. One, because we're still working out some of the logistics about what's needed in terms of maintenance of those buildings. I also have to get a quote from our insurance company on what it will be to insure a vacant building. So there are still some logistics that I have to work out, and there are still some logistics that the superintendent and the school committee have to work out relative to the Kennedy School. I have also put in here an estimate based on a 25% reduction of utilities at the Kennedy School. We know the Kennedy School will not be used 100% of the floor space. I believe it's probably about a third. So we are putting in some numbers of some guesstimates in this memo. Those numbers are not included. The second reason why I did not include that is many people may remember last year in the override, the one budget that has really not at all come back since before the pandemic is the town facilities department. They were by far, in addition to the DPW, by far the two that were hit the hardest from inflation 2 or 3 years ago when inflation was up by 8-9%. Electricity, stormwater, gas, propane, plumbing supplies, supply chain problems, electricity, all the parts that go into fixing town buildings have gone through the roof, and that's why the facilities was a part of last year's override. One thing the community may want to consider is to not reduce the structural budget deficit and somehow have a conversation about if there was some way to fix that structural budget deficit through an override or other means, that money could be repurposed from the savings of Parmenter and Kennedy. That money could be repurposed back into the redistricting plan and the facilities improvements that the schools are going through. So I just lay that out there for all of you to think about and consider as we go forward with these pieces. I've put in the packet a revised budget model, and I have also, because people ask me this every single week, all the time, they say, well, how much does an override cost if it's this much or that much based on my property value? I've also included in the packet an override number matrix based on property values on one side and looking at the quantity of dollars of an override on the other, and you can get, again, these are not 100% factual numbers that you would put out there. These are just estimates to help the community conversation. So I'm sorry to clause that several times, but I know that people sometimes jump on these numbers and run with them. But these are, I thought it would be helpful for everybody to have all of this data for the next 7 weeks while we go through these 6 listening sessions. So I will yield the floor, Mr. Chairman, and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jamie. We'll go to the superintendent to give a brief overview, then we'll go to the audience. So, Lucas?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lucas Jagir, the proud superintendent of Franklin Public Schools. It's good to see everybody here. Just to talk through just some basics, not to over-reiterate what Jamie shared, just broadly about the town, but just for schools, we did present a superintendent's recommended budget, as Mr. Helen mentioned, where we have an $80.4 million recommendation, which is a 2.9 million dollar increase to the budget, which is 3.7887%. We will be fixing that. The town administrator and I talked about that, but basically it's an $80.4 million budget. As many of you know, we recently have gone through and are in the process of a redistricting and a reorganization across the community. Mr. Helen mentioned a few of the buildings that are impacted, but ultimately all of our schools, pre-K through 8, are impacted in some form or fashion. We're unifying our middle schools under one roof on Oak Street, and our elementary schools will be moved and unified on Washington Street and Lincoln Street at those complexes. That led to us being able to make a recommendation that landed at the numbers I shared with you, by reclassifying a lot of our FTEs and staffing that we needed to now support the needs in a school building that is set up for 500 kids at each elementary school and 1,000 students at our middle school. So with that reorganization, we reclassified. In addition to that, we anticipated economies of scale as a result of the unification, and that led to the reduction in the budget of approximately 20 FTE. Those range from administrators to secretaries to classroom subject area teachers, some special education, and any area where there was an economy based on the class size and caseloads. If you'd like more information on that, there's a presentation that I presented on Tuesday night that has some slides that provide more detail. Next Tuesday, the 4th, we'll be presenting for the budget hearing, and we'll be resharing a few of those slides in addition to other details of the budget as we walk through this process. This is my final 2 points. One, this is the earliest we have landed with a budget, and we did that so that we would have our information from the school department in line with the town's figures, so that the town administrator had all the information. So as we talk through what we know is a structural deficit within town, we didn't want to have the school department be the question mark for the model. As Mr. Helen said, we're still in the process of building this. There are still assumptions built in. We will work through those assumptions as we move through. But what we felt, we all agreed, was the best scenario was to provide as much information as we could, as early as we could, as long as it's verifiable to the point that we know. And that's where we're at. Final piece is that's it. That's it. It's been a long run. We're trying to meet. We're trying to just make sure that we're staying in line with deadlines so that the community, the school committee, the town council, and the town administrator, and our school department have the information we need earlier, so that decisions can be made that we feel are in the best interest of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. And again, just so everybody understands, we started this process back in, as Jamie alluded to, back in August, early September. And we said we were going to take step by step through the entire budget process. And I know at times there was a lot of feeling within the community, well, you need to get this number out. You need to get this number out. Well, what we're trying to explain with this process that we've gone through this year is what it takes to build a budget annually. And I want to make sure that I thank the municipal staff, department heads for getting their budgets in, and especially the school department and the school administration, because as Lucas just alluded to, this is much earlier than normal for the school department to have an initial number put together. So I thank them very much for that. It's worked well into this process. We're here tonight to listen to the community, and as I said, there'll be 6 of these listening sessions, and we want to hear from you. We want to answer your questions as to why we are where we are right now, whatever. So with that, I'm going to go to the audience and look for questions, and please, very informal. I know we're sitting up here, but very informal. We're not. If you have a question, please come forward, ask it. There is no dumb question. Okay, somebody's got to be first.
All right.
Thank you, Jane.
I'll break the ice. Okay, I don't have a lot of questions.
Just identify yourself.
Everybody
For those
knows
who
I
don't know
am.
who you are.
Jane Calloway Tripp, 607 Maple Street. I don't have a lot of questions right now because right now I'm listening and I'm paying attention and I'm formulating where I need to go. However, I've been watching the finance committees. I watched the capital sub-budget committee meeting, the school committee meeting. So I do have one question on the school committee meeting, and I know that it was touch based on, but it didn't make sense to me. And it requires the busing because of the redistricting. Now, we're just gonna make random numbers because my head wants to explode. So we have X amount of buses that we presently have right now. Those harbor all the children from K through 6 that we have to transport because they're over 2 miles from the school. And they also have for all the pay to ride students. Got it. With the redistricting, a lot of those students that went to Parmenter and Kennedy are now going to be over that 2 mile mark. They are going to be required to be busing, but they are not going to be a paid to ride. So I guess my question is, I get the school will be funding that out of the budget because that's what you have to do. But you're going to have all the pay to ride people still going on, which means now we're going to have more buses. Chances are you're not going to be able to still use the same amount of buses because you're going to have to bus more kids. How is this going to affect those pay to ride kids? Are they now going to get more increases to help compensate for the additional buses?
Well, it's a good question, and we're going to be doing a transportation presentation, just so you know. I'll answer the question, but we're going to be doing a school committee meeting after the budget, the February break when we come back in March, is dedicated to transportation, big yellow buses, maps, heat maps, all the things that people are interested to know about who's outside of the circle, what's the data showing, and we will present all of this in much more detail. To answer your question tonight, the analysis we've done, if you look at a map and you look at the 5 elementaries and you look at all the students that are outside of those areas, there's about, I want to say, a 20 student difference. I'm going to double check my math here, but it's comparable because you have 2 locations that you're transporting the students to, right? In that, we believe, based on what we've seen, is we could utilize basically the same amount of buses to transport students. We don't overfill our buses to 77, which is the max, right?
Right.
And we use a number like 65, Jana? 65, so that in the case we have room for move-ins and things like that. The one thing I mentioned the other night was we are revising our sign-up process because you may recall, if people have paid attention or on Facebook, the issues with busing in the summer and people saying they were waitlisted and whatnot. We have deadlines and people weren't able to check like a status update if they're registered. So we're cleaning up that system, but it's going to be really predicated on people signing up for a bus and registering ahead of time so we can include them in the count. We automatically include every student we're required to drive, but that still leaves room on each bus for the pay-to-ride students.
Okay, so, but if you
And-
did have to increase busing, would that affect the pay to rides?
If we had to increase busing, we will, busing costs, we know now, we believe we have the buses that we need, we've budgeted for in this budget to
Okay.
account for that. The other piece I will mention, it's connected, if you will. The budget that we've put forth also includes restoring how we have typically at schools contributed to the transportation line and the athletics line and some of those lines where right now athletics is 100% paid by users' fees.
Right.
So that and buses have gone up. You may know that the bus fees have increased. One of the things with this, in this model that we've put forth is, and it's all predicated on us fixing the structural deficit, right? We've baked in there is trying to return some of those user fees back into what, like a market value for a school district in an area, so that our fees are comparable to communities similar to ours.
Okay. So I will be watching the report.
Yes. I know you will.
Just to follow up on Jane's question, Lucas, if in fact we're busing more students, we're required to bus more students.
Yep.
That leaves less room for the pay to rides. Is that a correct assumption?
If we have the same amount of buses and we have an increase in students who require busing, we would have less seats on the bus for pay to ride.
So in other words, there may be pay to ride people that can't get pay to ride.
Point of
And they
information.
wouldn't,
But
Point of information, yeah, I'm on, okay.
yeah,
We already have more flexibility, so the buses are stuck because of where they have to pick up students
Yeah.
and deliver students. So we don't have efficiencies from that perspective. So if you were to even everything out and put somewhat equal numbers of students on all the buses, having them go to the same couple of schools,
Yeah.
it actually creates a lot more space than you're thinking of. We're not right at this kind of cusp of every bus is at 70 right now. We have a lot more variability, and in really ironing it out to these two different locations, to Jane's point, to your point, we have a lot more room where we're not going to suddenly say, oh, well, we're going to be at 77 on every single bus, and then the pay-to-ride kids are going to have to be basically able to pay for another bus. There's a lot more behind the scenes that we're basically balancing out. That absorbs a lot more than I think people suspect. And I know that everyone has their own experience with the buses, but having kind of been through some of the discussions there, we have more room than meets.
okay, I guess, my statement was more along the lines of, if in fact we got to a point, have we ever had a point where we've had to turn pay to ride students? We've always been able to accommodate everyone that wanted to pay to ride. We've been able to accommodate.
That's accurate.
So,
we have. And
okay,
it's taken
perfect.
time.
That,
Just,
understood.
Build me in a little buffer there, Mr. Mercer. It takes time. If there's a wait list, obviously you come off the wait list as you reorganize, and it's the idea of the routes. So if you have 5 elementaries, there's only so many routes that can circle around that elementary school. So that's where the inefficiency comes that Paul's talking about.
Right.
That if there's
Right.
2 buses heading to Parmenter, they're only picking up in that area and bringing back to that school. So you might have a bus that has 42 kids on it and another bus that has 60 kids because of the way the routes. So when you're going to 2 locations and you're picking up from the area, the routes that you design allow you to pick up more students on the way. So without a map and a visual, it'll make more sense, but I hope that helps answer some of the questions. You're welcome.
Just very early on in the discussions, and having a, yeah.
It was the first one.
Break the ice.
Absolutely, Jane. Having a wife that drove a bus for 40 years,
Yeah.
I'm familiar with a lot of the route stuff.
Sure.
Chairman
So-
Mercer, if I could, Chairman Mercer?
Sure,
I just
please.
want to, I think it's worth just, while we end the bus conversation, to note that there's analysis going on also about the fees, because I do hear a lot about reduction in fees being a motivator for this override, because the parents are strapped. And we recognized this year, so when the override failed, rather than, more teacher layoffs, we did burden the parents with more fees, so we went up to 500, we took off the cap. What that resulted in was less riders, which actually resulted in hurting our budget. So it's not even just that we're reevaluating it so that we can alleviate the parent stress. It's also from a perspective of being more financially prudent and making sure that we're hitting that sweet spot. So I just wanted to mention that. It's a lot of work they're doing to make sure we get it right.
George?
I should know, as chairman of the Finance Committee, but my head's about to explode about who pays and who doesn't. Is it if you want to ride within the two-mile circle or whatever it is, you pay. If you're outside the 2-mile circle, it's...
Through 6th grade.
Oh,
Yes.
through 6th grade.
Through 6th
whatever.
grade. After 6th grade, you hit 7th grade, and everyone is a pay-to-ride.
I've
So
seen,
middle school and high school.
I think I've seen 13 of these budgets, and I missed that.
It's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, George.
It's great.
Huh?
That's why we're doing it, George. It's great.
Anyone else?
I didn't think I was going to get...
Okay. Come on now. Somebody's got to have a question out there. Please
Here they
come
come.
forward.
See, I always thought if you want to ride a bus, you had to pay.
Hi, my name is Catherine Kellett. I'm an English teacher at Franklin High School, so address is 218 Oak Street. And I've been teaching in Franklin for 9 years. And I'm here today to talk to you about the impacts of the budget cuts on our schools and to advocate for more funding for Franklin Public Schools in the town budget. The school community as a whole is feeling the effects of our lost funding. We lost over 30 educators, and more are slated to be cut at the end of this year, especially if another override does not pass. Programs, as you know, including drama and robotics at the high school, have been cut. Clubs and music programs have been cut. Sports and bus fees, as you were talking about, have increased, which have created more barriers for students to participate. Anecdotally, we've been hearing about families beginning to send their kids to private school or talk about sending their kids to private school, which will ultimately decrease the funding that we get from the state, from Chapter 70. We, as educators, want to ask, is this what the town of Franklin wants? Class sizes have gone up significantly at the high school this year. I have about 30 more students than I did last year, which is a big jump. Students' behaviors are continuing to become more challenging, and we have fewer staff to support these behaviors. I deeply care about my students. I'm very proud, for example, of my record as an AP English educator, where 90% of my students have passed the AP exam over the last 4 years when I introduced the course to Franklin High School. However, I'm struggling to provide the same level of care to my students under these changing conditions. Educating students is the most important responsibility that a town has. And the town needs to increase its funding if it wants to continue to draw families to Franklin, to keep families in Franklin, to maintain the property values that you enjoy. Investing in education lifts us all up. So I don't have a question at this time, but I know some of my colleagues have questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So I am Luke Diaz. I teach at Remington Middle School, so that's 628 Washington, and I'm so proud of what I gave as a Franklin teacher that I moved to 104 Jefferson, so thank you all. I have a very specific question that I wanted to ask, and it's related to, I know there was some commentary about certain departments being hit harder than others as a result of inflation, but I think that what is also true is we're seeing a pretty meteoric rise in insurance costs right now, and I think, if I'm correct, the only budget item in terms of department that has that insurance item pre-built in is the school department budget, and we're just asking, I don't know if I have a question or a request, but I'm kind of asking why is that, and is that something that could be looked at in the future, considering that's, changing at the rate and sometimes exceeding inflation in many cases.
Yeah, that's a great question, Luke. So, I would just say that it's a mixed bag. I'm going to give you a long answer. So, 10 years ago when I started here, this is generally the way it's been. I don't know historically why the school department at Account 300 has healthcare in it. I think traditionally, maybe previous administrations, previous school committees wanted a little bit more control over exactly those employees there. But at the end of the day, if the town wanted to take, the schools, take the 7 million, I think it is, Jonna, 7 million or so out of the school budget and put it in the municipal budget, at the end of the day, it's 6 one, half dozen the other. There's no real net gain, because regardless of where you put the money, it's still a massive cost driver for both sides. And the fact that the Board of Health or the town clerk or the one FTE conservation department or the 2 FTE Board of Health department, the town side has always basically had it in one lump benefits budget. And the school has always, as long as I think probably going back 25 plus years, has been in the school account 300. The one difference I would say is for retired teachers that entered into the GIC some years ago, that amount of money is in the municipal budget. So that is not in the school budget. I think one of the confusions that has been brought up, and I'm a little surprised by it, because ultimately health insurance is a huge cost driver. The main reason why it's expensive is 2 reasons. One, our loss runs as an organization, both school and town, are really bad. And so, for example, if our loss runs are at 110%, just for the audience and folks at home, you for every $1 in premium you pay, the health insurance company is paying $1.10. So whether that's in account 300 or account 910 or account 1, it really doesn't matter. The second reason is we're in the highest cost health insurance state in the country by far. I make a joke that it's for health insurance here is like cheese in Wisconsin or corn in Nebraska. It's just part of our fabric of what we do in Massachusetts. The good thing is we have also the best healthcare in the country. And we also have seen a reduction in the amount of providers. Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim merged a couple years ago, so the competitive environment is less. We just went out as part of our IAC. You remember Joe Corey, who does an unbelievable job. I'm not saying that just because he's standing in front of me. He really, really does, is a huge advocate. Yes. I really mean it. He comes to every meeting, and we just went out to bid, and every single health insurance provider in Massachusetts declined to quote on us. That's because they lose money on us. So in some ways, we have to find ways as an organization and as a town, given that we're looking at Massachusetts in 2025 is looking at 15% everywhere, even in the private sector, we have to find ways to do better cost control of healthcare. As outlined in the memo, one of the things we are proposing this year is to increase the split from 68-32 to 70-30. And we are trying to take this advantage this year with the poor loss runs of trying to do a little bit of a reshuffle of healthcare in general. Obviously, there's some deductible changes, there's some other things, but we have not had any plan design change of co-pays or prescriptions or any other significant parts. We have not done any changes in 4 years. And our employees across every union has prioritized that. It's new dashboards, it's new cards. It has been a priority for a lot of members and a lot of employees to not disrupt, because I take the town insurance too. And I hear it from my family as well. Oh my God, I gotta go set up a new portal. I have to go and check if this qualifies at my doctor, whether they're in network, out of network. I mean, it's a lot of work now on a family, myself included and all of you. It's a ton of work. I'm draining just talking about it. It's a lot of work to go through changing healthcare. And I do kind of applaud the employees of trying to maintain some level of stability. And the last reason I'd say is we had this past year what I called an act of God, even by general metrics of assumptions. Earlier this year in 2024, from January to April, we saw half a dozen extraordinarily expensive claims, which even on average data, which healthcare is generally based off of, right? It's really an algorithm almost at this point. We far exceeded that high cost claim threshold. And I always bring out the empathetic side of that, which is, to be honest with you, that's somebody's family in all of our units who probably has cancer, who probably has a life or death situation. I know there are some people in the room who are aware of who those folks are, and those situations are very, very very hard. So I lead with that by saying that's not like I want to take that away or reduce the quality of care, and I know you're not saying that either. But it's just the reality of where we're at in healthcare in Massachusetts. I did create a link into the budget. If you go online to a BUR article and looking at this across the board, we do look at the GIC every year as an IAC, and every year the IAC votes that down. And the main reason for everybody's education on that is once you enter into the GIC, there's 3 factors. 1, you're then mandatory in for a 3-year commitment. Number 2, you're susceptible to state budget allocations. So if the state cuts healthcare, like they did in 2009, where a lot of teachers groups got into the GIC in 2009, and then the state changed the plan design. And the biggest reason, and I know our representatives know this, is once you enter in the GIC, you have no control over what plans the employees take, which will unquestionably drive up costs at a huge rate. And I can guarantee you there would be layoffs across the board because we would then have to pay those costs out of the town budget. And I think the last thing I would say is to that is healthcare at the end of the day, it just comes out of the pot, the overall pie of the budget. Regardless of what budget it's in, it all comes out of the same pie. So when that number goes up, it's all going to come out of that pie somewhere or there. So that's like my 3 minutes or 5 minutes on healthcare.
Yeah,
I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and I think that my singular point that I was just wondering and asking about was because we're all in the same healthcare, regardless of what department we're in. And I think that 3.8% increase is due partially as the rate for the school department.
A little bit.
As a result of that healthcare, which is the only department that feels that.
Yep.
I think that as I look to equity across all our departments, whether it's police, fire, DPW, like I would like that number to be true for all departments and be a little bit more accurate without that insurance piece there. So I think I agree to your point that it's still the same number, but I think that for transparency, it might be helpful to have it all in one place as a line item.
I would go the reverse. I would not put healthcare in 30 budgets on the municipal side. My suggestion would be take it out of the school department.
That's my
That's
suggestion.
what
as well.
Oh,
That's my
that's
suggestion as
what
well.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll
Same
do it
page.
in a heartbeat.
All right, great.
But I just want to make sure you guys are clear.
Right.
You're going to see you're going to see a multi-million-dollar decrease in your budget for the account 300.
That would parallel the insurance that was out.
Right. So if Jonna said the number for healthcare in the count 300 was 7 million,
7 million.
we would take 7 million out.
Okay.
So I don't want to hear when people show up at the meetings and say, hey, why is our budget going down 5 million? I just want to make sure that is like very, very crystal clear. And I will say also, as part of the reorganization of the school and town finance departments, Emma Collins, who's sitting over here, Karen Bratt, and Stacy Costello is somewhere around, we have built in more HR and central office administration to be able to do that. And as we grow, our hope is, at least for my sanity and Karen Bratt's sanity, is that Emma and Stacy, probably working with Shannon Dixon on the school side, those 3 would really create your core group of managing all benefits for both town and school. So that is absolutely something we'd be happy to consider, and I'll talk to the superintendent about it. Yeah, thanks, Luke.
Paul?
So Jamie, I think one of the things just to kind of think of here, and I can definitely appreciate the idea of, the 7 million doesn't disappear from anything that the town owes. But one thing that I think might be very helpful kind of in the future is looking at that, I think to the point being made by Lucas was the optics. Because if you take that out of the school budget and the increase that we had this year, we're asking for 3.2% more versus 3.8. It's just kind of an optics thing there where I know the goal is to try and sit in with that 2.5.
Yeah.
So I think it really allows us all, I think schools, finance committee, town council, to all tell that kind of same story as we're a lot closer than sometimes it looks. And taking that insurance line item out.
I would just
Helps with
caution the school community on one thing. Traditionally in the past, okay, if an employee does not take health care, okay, traditionally health care has been an account in the school budget that has given them greater flexibility within their budget, okay? So if, say, 54% of our school and town employees, for example, take the health insurance, 46% do not. You heard me right. 46% of our town and school employees do not use our town health care. So I believe the main reason why the previous administrations, previous to Lucas, have wanted to maintain that in their account is because if a school, if say they get to October 1st after the teacher employment, is done, and say they find out that they had, I'm making these numbers up, say instead of 300, say they assume 300 healthcare accounts in their budget, but then by October 1st it's 280 accounts, that's 20 people at an assumption of $25,000 per benefit. It gives the school business administrator a lot more flexibility to deal with cost drivers in the middle of the year, like fill in the blank. And so by removing that from your budget, you will not have as much flexibility in account 300. And I see some people
we can
nodding
argue
their
it both
heads.
ways too, right? Like, so
Well,
in
I'm
the
just-
opposite true as well.
I personally don't understand. I will just admit, it's 6 one, half dozen the other to me. I'm happy to do whatever
think
y'all
I
want.
haven't-
But I think before you go into this with such passion, you might want to just consult the school business administration. And I think there's been a little misinformation that has been poured out about this issue about other districts versus ours. So just to be clear about a few things while we're doing this, because it's a great topic. A lot of districts across Massachusetts actually bargain health insurance with the union at the collective bargaining table. You cannot compare apples to apples everywhere. So when people say, boy, why is this district over here? Health insurance isn't in, say, the town of X. It's not in their budget. And we rally folks to support that. We have to also be cognizant that there's a myriad of different settings of some districts have a PEC, some districts like us have IECs, some school districts, a lot of school districts are actually in the GIC. So you're comparing different levels. And I just want to make sure before everybody jumps down that, and this is exactly why we're having these listening sessions, over the next 7 weeks, the superintendent and our offices can discuss that. But I just want to make sure I'm clear, the school business administrator will certainly lose a lot of maneuverability in their budget if you remove healthcare from account 300. I'm not saying I'm against it. I just want to make sure everybody looks at the comprehensive picture of it. That's all. Thank you.
Tom, may I?
One second, Paula, you all set?
Thank you.
Sure. Just a real
Ruthann,
quick,
go ahead.
point, and Jamie's point's completely valid because it's just moving money somewhere else, and ultimately our town has this deficit regardless of where the money is. I think that the union's point is that we've heard without us being very transparent about the fact that we do carry our health insurance, it becomes like an interdepartmental fight in town because it feels like the schools are really not living within their means, and that's like some political rhetoric that's like very strong in the community, and I think that's a pretty big point of misinformation that there are some significant mandates and cost drivers. So I think that's what I hear when it comes to health insurance. It's just that we just want people to know that we do have these extra burdens. That's not enabling us to stay within 2.5. It's not, frivolous spending, so to speak. So, thanks.
Thank you, Ruthann. Jamie?
So through you, just if you look at the budget model that was presented in the packet, and I appreciate that, Ruthann, because for the municipal side, in account 910, the benefits budget, you will notice retirement and pension, health life insurance benefits. And you will notice non-GIC school retirees. That's a $1.8 million increase over last year. So I agree with Ruthann, this should not be a debate about us versus them, or they're living within means they're not. I think what it is people just don't go down to 910 and look at that cost driver on the municipal side. For us, for an administration, it makes so much more efficient sense to have everything on one side. But I do agree with Ruthann. This issue should not be at all some sort of divider between anyone. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the money's out of the same pot. If you want to know my honest opinion, I'm just going to say it. This is a nothing burger. The issue we should be focusing on is how the heck we're going to control costs on healthcare and how we're going to try to improve the system to make it a recruitment and retention tool for police, fire, DPW, custodian, teachers, everybody. We're not looking at the right issue. We're barking up the wrong tree. The right tree to bark up is, why is our loss runs at 110, 118, 120? Why are we an organization that healthcare companies did not even quote or bid on? This whole, like, where the healthcare is, I'll be honest, is really not the issue. The issue is we need to work as an IAC on how we're going to contain healthcare costs so that we can provide a much more robust statistic to attract. The other piece is 46% of our employees, I guess I'm stunned that people aren't as shocked as I am at this, 46% of our employees are not taking insurance. That's not because of anything other than the fact our health insurance is not competitive. That's for every single school employee, that's for every custodian, every secretary, every admin, every non-union, every union. That's just across the board. In fact, this is an issue. If we stop painting it as put it in the police department or take it out of the school department, we got to get together as a community and understand at a greater level and stop doing that. And we got to start talking about how we're going to make our health insurance program more competitive so that when people are applying for jobs here, they're not taking a job in another district or another community because the health insurance is better, or they're just going to go with their spouse's plan or something like that. This is an issue. And this is exactly why I put it before the IAC this year, as Joe can validate, the 70-30 split. I'm well aware that that is much more the mode, the more frequent number that is across our area, and that's the tree that we all need to really rally around, and we need to bark up that one and not worry about which account which account the healthcare's in. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Is there anyone else on? Yeah, sure.
Can I ask what's probably a dumb question? Can you explain to me what IEC is,
I was just going to say, the acronyms,
Yeah.
we need to kind of explain the acronyms as we use them up here. Jamie and Lucas, really.
Thank you, Lauren. The IAC.
Oh,
is the,
IAC.
It's okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna do the words too. Insurance Advisory Committee, and it's a statutory mechanism where if you're looking for unity, this is a group that shows unity every year. Okay, it is comprised of, I think, 8 members. Each union has a member, has a voting member, and then also a designee in case they're unavailable. And there's also a retiree that's on that board. And we get together usually 6 or 7 times a year, and that's what we use as a group to negotiate health insurance with the carriers for healthcare.
Got it.
If you go into the budget narratives that are online, Karen and now Ken Storlazzi, they do a whole explanation of trends and high deductible and who meets what, and there's all sorts of data stats that are in the budget. If people are interested in that, they should go onto our onto the town's budget site, go into the budget narrative, and look up IAC. But it's a statutory mechanism the town approved, several decades ago. And really what it does is it allows the library, AFSCME, DPW, custodians, teachers, police, fire, sergeants, all of those unions and the retirees to come together to work on a consensus-based health insurance program for the following year.
Thank you.
Please, Sue.
Do I have to give my correct address?
30 Vino Philip, no. 38.
Right. You didn't have to give it out.
Yeah.
All right. Susan Roebuck, 38 Philomena Way. So, Jamie, I think your points related to insurance are very well taken. I was going back and forth about this, but I totally get where you're coming from. I think the hang up, and I think we should focus on how we reduce the costs as opposed to the percentages. But I think what we're trying to articulate here is that we've talked about trying to live within 2.5%. And so let me just ask a question. I'm not trying to pick on any particular budget here, but I'm just going to ask, like the fire department, it's 3.3% increase. So that doesn't include health insurance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so I think the point that people are making is the set 3.78% that the schools are asked or have increased does bake that in.
Okay.
Right. So I think that's the consideration, that sometimes that increase in percentage is misconceived because it doesn't include health. It includes health insurance where the other budgets don't. It's just more of a perception optic thing, not to suggest that you have to move it out of line item 300.
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, Patty Dolan, 35 Town Line Road. And I want to say thank you all for all the work that you're doing. As with Jane, I'm still in learning and listening mode and really appreciate all the time that you're spending with these listening sessions. I do want to say also to our superintendent, just an amazing, commendable job of pulling up the budget so early in the middle of trying to plan for the redistricting, which is no small undertaking without all of the budget adjustments. So thank you, and please don't quit. And then I also wanted to say, I think, again, just on the whole insurance thing, the reason it's a little bit of a something burger is because of the narrative that's been purveyed about, oh, the schools are increased X% to X% every year. Well, if you back out health insurance, that's a different number. And so I think that's what people are reacting to, not necessarily that you have to pull it, but as Paul said, it's really a 3.2 increase, not a 3.78 increase. So again, just something to take into consideration and to be part of the whole education that we're having now. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. You can't. Nice try, though. No. Councilor DeLarco wanted to speak, but because he can't, because...
I'd like to hear from Bobby.
This is subcommittee.
Hi, everybody. Susan Dewsnap, 10 Garden Street. I was just going to say something, and I'm having a senior moment. It was really a quick little quirk, but it'll come back to me. First thing I want to say is, bravo, Lucas. Oh, my gosh. The work that you and your team have done over the past year and a half is remarkable. My children will be graduated at the end of this year, but I want to express that I think the work that you have just done has been needed for so many years. My daughter's kindergarten class was 28 kids. That was 19 years ago. So I really want to commend you on the work. I'm excited for what you've developed. I'm excited for the efficiencies that you've built in for schools. You can manage your class sizes. I mean, I'm really, really pleased with it. So I want to commend you on that. I am hopeful that the fees do reduce. I want to express to everybody here, if you don't have kids in the school system, I'm in my last year. The son's going to graduate, God willing, on June 6th. And my fees are well over $2,000 this year. That's pretty big. And people may look and say, people can afford it. I think that is a big issue if a young family is looking at Franklin versus other towns. Mm-hmm. If I had to pay those fees for both of my kids every year, I got to tell you, I don't know. So I'm really, really hoping that over time, as the redistricting impact, we see it to full fruition, that the fees do start to come down, because I think that is important. So thank you for looking at that. Jamie, hey, I don't have 3 minutes, right?
No.
That was my quirk. That was what I was going to say. I'm like, I don't have 3 minutes.
Wait a minute, I'll give you 3.
I don't need much more.
I got my timer going.
Yeah, that was going to be my little snarky thing. Jamie, your accolade page I thought was really, really good in your memo. Okay, because we talk a lot about the schools. We know what the schools have gone through over the past year and a half. It's been painful. We understand. But the accolades page I thought was amazing. Page 7, where you talk about our ISO 1 rated Franklin Fire Department. Fabulous. I had some personal experience with the Franklin Police recently, and I got to tell you, I can't say better things about them.
They're still not going to fix your ticket.
No, I didn't have a ticket. It wasn't a ticket, Tom. Wasn't a ticket. I haven't gotten caught yet.
Gotta have a little levity.
I haven't gotten caught yet. But I think the accolades are really important. And the reason I want to point it out is that, we have a budget deficit. I was on the Finance Committee for so long. I know we have a budget deficit. I knew this was coming. But here's the deal. We have two solutions here. We cut expenses, or we ask for an override, right? We all know that. I don't want to cut any more expenses. Okay? I'm a taxpayer. I don't want to cut any more expenses. I think we're there. We're probably at a really nice sweet spot now. Yeah. So let's go for that override. But when we do go for the override, let's base it, please, on a 5-year projection. It's not $3.6 million. Okay? So I'm going to ask you all, you're on the committee, you know why you're on the committee. I'm hoping that at some point, I don't know in the timeline when we're going to see a revised 5-year projection, but the override number isn't 3.6 because we're just going to be back here again. One of the major drivers of our structural deficit is that we're in that hold harmless clause. Thank you to the state of Massachusetts for giving us way more money than we've been allocated. That keeps our taxes low. But that also contributes every year to our structural deficit. Our Chapter 70 money, which is almost, a third of our revenue, maybe 25% of our town revenue, is only growing 1.2%, not 2.5. So the math doesn't work, guys. So let's make sure that when we calculate that override number, that we're putting enough in to give us enough funding to not have to come back to the town in another 5 years. Okay, so that's my recommendation. And the other thing is, in that number, let's restore our stabilization funds, please. Don't use those one-time funds. It makes me crazy. And
We just did that last
We
night.
returned $1 million last night.
Yep.
The million
I
that we
didn't
put
watch
in last year.
I didn't watch it yet. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
Still got to be voted, but
He's a yes.
Yeah.
he's
So,
definitely a yes.
those stabilization funds are so important, and we can't use them to plug our budget. And the other thing is, please put onto the financial calendar annual 5-year projections, please, please, okay? So there we go. What was that, like 7 minutes, maybe?
Not bad.
Can you stick around for 1 sec?
Oh, I don't know why.
So,
Maybe not, Jamie.
you raised a great question about the 5-year forecast. Sue asked me earlier over an email too. Number one, I thought also, Sue, you were going to say we're one of the best high schools in the state of Massachusetts. And well, people, there's a lot of negativity around. And Lucas and I wrote all these out because as the new year clicked, and my staff knows this, and the superintendent knows this, this is an amazing community for a lot of reasons. We have been through an incredibly turbulent ride for the last 5 years. I think everyone knows that, and I think we all have to have some sensitivity to this. 5 years ago, next month, changed the world. And it's been very disruptive for a lot of people. And there's been a lot of change. But when you look at it holistically, like I do and the council does, and I think the school committee does, we are in a far better position today than we were then. I appreciate and give you the same accolades. I say it to Lucas and the school committee all last year. They are doing 3 of the hardest things you can do all at once. Redistricting, fees, and an override, right? These are the hardest things to do. And I've given credit over the last year on all my slideshows. And look where we're still landing. Out of districts that are over 1,500 students, large districts, not Weston, okay, not Millis, not Algonquin, not Neshoba. We're right there with Arlington and Andover, towns we're supposed to always theoretically aspiring to be. We are not aspiring anymore, we are there. And that pride in this community this year has got to elevate and has got to pick up. So I appreciate you acknowledging that page, because in the last 5 years, all the people in this room and at home, all of our teachers, educators, the unions have done an outstanding job. There's a point now, I think, in the middle of the decade where, to your point about the 5-year forecast, and that's why I wanted to speak, the reason why that's not out is if you just look at the deficit of what was in the model earlier this fall, there was one huge factor that is driving those numbers up. And that was the Norfolk County Retirement Board's pension assessment. And I explained this in the last memo, and the reason why I have not put out another 5-year forecast, I don't want to freak people out. The Retirement Board is going to go back and recalibrate that. In fact, they're having a meeting they just posted today over the next couple months. This is a huge deal. I mean a huge deal. Because depending on what the pension system decides and when we're supposed to fully fund our pension, really has probably a 50%, 40% to 50% markup in those deficits in 27, 28, 29, and 30. If I just put that forecast out with the assumption of where the pension board was, which does cover, by the way, school and town employees, I don't want to freak people out, and I want to make sure I have really good information, and I want to make sure that the towns in Norfolk County are working with the pension board, and more importantly, the pension board is working with us to make sure that we're working on these assumptions, because I can guarantee you every community in Norfolk County is seeing the same issue. And this could be disastrous countywide, which then means legislators are going to get involved and we're into a legislative debate. What we also need to do is we need to really, really dial in and focus on the needs in FY26 as we go through the redistricting project. And as the superintendent has said many times, once his whole focus is on September of this year, as we evolve years and beyond, I think there will continue to be economies of scale. The last single point I'm going to make is the issue of affordability. You are correct, Sue, that 27, 28, 29, even irrelevant of the pension issue or health care, okay? There's an affordability problem in Massachusetts, and there's an affordability problem in this community that we have heard from a lot of residents loud and clear. There needs to be a balance. We can't just do, and I've said this publicly, we cannot override ourselves out of this. Okay, and we cannot not do any overrides either. As you just eloquently said, you know, Sue, you were on the FinCom for 9 years. You've been on the FinCom my whole tenure here. And many of you, right? This has been a structural problem for a lot of years. And we need to fix the leaky roof. And I think that there needs to be some sort of recognition while we're doing these listening sessions on trying to balance the needs of the community with also the affordability that we've heard. Because Sue, I think, and Sue, I think everybody in this room knows.
Sue squared.
No matter what town you live in, affordability is extraordinarily tight. So we really need to dial in this year, in my opinion, on fixing the leaky roof. And then I think what taxpayers really, after this year, really deserve, to your point, is a really strategic strategy moving forward of what it is the schools need in the future, if it's AP restoration, if it's arts, whatever. I put in the memo, what do we need for additional EMS personnel based on call volume? Cheap plug, February 5th, for those of you interested in public safety. EMS Battalion Chief Billy Numbers and EMS Captain Lori Kay are going to do a presentation on those metrics and those numbers. So those of you that are interested in public safety should get a bird's eye view into that. We need to really get through this year and then still try to figure out DPW, water tanks, like there's a lot of other infrastructure needs, and how we're going to balance the affordability of the community and what people can pay, what they're willing to pay, and for what. And that's really the reason why I have not put out a revised 5-year projection yet, because I don't want to scare the bejesus out of people with the pension thing, because the pension assessment that they put out several months ago was a colossal problem. Colossal. Colossal. So I appreciate that question and all those thoughts too. I really appreciate it.
So I'd love to just give one more comment on that. So I appreciate that.
Yep.
And there are always going to be things that are really difficult to plan. But I question how financial decisions are being made without having a look into 2, 3, 4 years out. So I'm a financial person. It's what I do for a living. I rarely make decisions without thinking about what's coming down the road. So that's why I really feel it's important that a 5-year projection, even though we know there may be some items on there that they may be, I think we need to have it on a piece of paper and we need to see it. We, town council, FinCom, they need to see it on a more regular basis. That's just my 2 cents. So All right.
Thank you.
I think I've overstayed my welcome. Is that what I should say?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead,
Thank you all.
Lucas.
I just wanted to point out, you mentioned the highlights, and I appreciate it also, Jamie, you and I talked about this, putting that in there. We want to see this continue, right?
Yeah,
And what we don't
I do.
want is, we've mentioned over time, is we don't want to see the slow erosion. If we can't keep up, this is a structural deficit.
Mm-hmm.
If we can't solve this, we're going to see the erosion. So the students today that are earning these rankings and putting those stats out, the same students in middle school might not be having the same experience. So over time, it's one of those things where the budget we've put forth, this is the only year that I think I can say we've been able to, because of once in a career, tell you about, well, at least my career.
Not the way to tell the
Well, once in a career reorganization. You don't do these things every 2 years. It's just, you just don't. So it's like the only year that you can look at and say, hey, we've redesigned how we're set up. It's created a way to reset. The theme of our budget is laying a successful foundation, is that we're trying to reset and rebuild, but we're trying to do that to make sure that we're still providing the same quality. So there are economies of scale, but we're trying to maintain the same quality. And you'll notice in the budget that we presented Tuesday night, it incorporates in bringing fees back into a reasonable area so that parents can expect to have affordable fees. It's built in.
Yeah.
Some of the positions that were cut over the last year, bringing those back in as we settle in the middle school, the classroom sizes at the elementary school that are exceeding the range, bringing them back in. And it's all done within our ability to do that in this one time. And at the workshop, the other Sue made a comment around, this is one of the only years you can talk about that and get a reward for a lot of work and a lot of reduction in this way. Because to reduce the way we did last year in the model we had was painful, right? And I think that's the point. So now, to do it this way is an opportunity. And I do appreciate it, and I think we all share an interest. I'm also a taxpayer, a parent who pays the sports fees. I'm living in town, working in town. I want to see my value in my home. I also want great service from the fire department and the police department, and I want all the things that we've all come to enjoy as a community. We want to keep that expectation up. But we have to solve this deficit, and it's an us thing, and I think that's where we're at today.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you all for your volunteerism. It's a lot of work, and I appreciate it. So
Thank you, Sue.
Hi there. Megan Benson, Winthrop Drive. So I guess I'll start with one clarifying question. Is the idea here for the override something similar to what we did last time in terms of this general override that would go to different departments? Or are we still determining that?
I think that's still to be determined.
Still to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So-
We're not there yet.
Okay.
That's kind of what we're doing with these listening sessions, is listening to the community before we make a recommendation to the council.
But just very quickly, I think one thing to note there is if you look at how we got to this number, it's based on all the different values that Jamie has put together already and Lucas has put together already.
Correct.
So that's with the schools looking at the increases that were talked about 2 nights ago. So that kind of in a roundabout way that answers your question. The
Yep.
numbers that have come out, the requests from all the different departments, you know, throughout the letter that Jamie put, you know, we have the percentages for each group. That's the guideline that
Right.
we've kind of come to this number with. So it's not that we just said, all right, the town as a whole,
Right.
we're under by X amount. We'll find out where it goes. I think that direction is how we came to that number in the first place.
Okay, so
That's
that
cool.
leads me to my next question, which is, we can legally create separate overrides, right? So we could say, here's one for the schools, here's one for fire, police, DPW, and they could all go to vote. So then the language would be specific, where it says, this is what we want. You know, we want X amount for the schools, vote on this. We want X amount for police, fire, DPW, whatever it might be. So we could do that, right?
Yeah, so legally you can do that. You could put 10 questions on the ballot at any ballot. That's at the discretion of the town council.
Yeah.
I will be very blunt and very early in saying they can override me. That was a
Not
weird
the same
pun on
way,
words.
yeah.
They could overrule me. I would say that's a bad idea. because to me, that does not build unity. It builds more us versus them, and you're going to fracture the community. I don't see this, and I know sometimes people try to put words in my mouth, but I don't see this as, and I thought Paul actually explained that really well. I don't see this as that department, this department, this department, that department. When I put these numbers out, to Paul's point, I look at it in the aggregate, and I just say there's a structural budget deficit holistically at 3.6 million. And so I know some people want to try to carve up the pie more, not me. This is a structural budget deficit. By town charter, the town administrator puts out the budget on behalf of the entire community. By earlier mid-March, I'll do a preliminary budget as to what I'm going to file in April, and then I will make a professional recommendation at that point to the town council, the joint budget committee, and the community as to how I see fit. But just to be clear, so rumors don't get online and words get put in my mouth, I will never say we should put on multiple questions, only one for fire, one for senior center, one for recreation, one for schools. I think that is a terrible idea. It's just my opinion, though.
Okay,
It's just
so
one man's trash.
Just to counter that, what happens is, from like community feedback, what happens is we're asking for this amount, right? It's going to the schools for 1 year, and then it could go anywhere. So
Yep.
in terms of specific language, I think that's where, feedback, I think, from the community showed that last time we tried to do this, not long ago, was that it was very unclear where this money could potentially end up. So I think that's part of it is, there's people who obviously in any town have priorities, right? Where that money should go. So I'm wondering if the language will ultimately be more specific, and perhaps that is part of this process?
That is part of the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Can I chime in on this one too? Just because I know that was a big concern last time, and I think one thing that I want the group of people to know, and George says it all the time, we go line by line every budget year. So every budget year, we'll look at the school and say, all right, it goes from 70 to 80. Explain to me why. And then they tell us why, and then facilities, great. You're going up 10%, why? Ugh, because our ice went up, whatever. So they have to justify, and then we give our recommendation to the town council whether or not that makes sense, and it's kind of checked all our points. If something passed, and I'm looking at, okay, they're 3.6, say it was 4, and it kind of falls in line with what this budget is. And then say the following year, the school budget then went down 2 million, we'd say, why? Like, we don't understand. Like, we're supporting growth. That doesn't make any sense to me. And then we saw that kind of trickled into other lines. We would have a really long meeting. It's actually 3 days. We would have a really long time of saying, none of this makes sense. And everybody would have to justify it. And likely, we've never not advocated for the budget to go through. But I would say that I would, for one, not advocate for it to go through. So it's a very unlikely scenario where it would go into the bucket and then get removed. It gets too many eyeballs on it for people to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Just doesn't pass the smell test.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense, and I appreciate that.
sure.
I think also the fact that it goes into certain buckets to begin with, and then could be pulled from those buckets. That's a concern, and I think valid.
Really quickly, Megan. So to your point, and just to be very clear, because we've never had a chance as a community to talk about this, and I think you raised an excellent point. So in the MOU, so first of all, going into this year, I see no reason for any MOU. The reason why the MOU was there last year, okay, is because there was no engagement. There was a very microscopic window between when the council had to vote and when the budget process was there. The superintendent gave the joint budget subcommittee last year in March, kind of 4 doors, and then in April, the school committee came forward and said, we need an override for FY25. There were many pieces of FY26 and beyond that were going to be, there were many costs in the town budget that were going to be unknown at the time. The MOU was exceptionally clear. What I do agree with is there was no time for adequate debate, discussion, engagement within the community, because the priority was to have an override that June. So we were cramped very, very tight. So I did the best job I could. But for FY25 in the MOU, it was very clear where the money was going. $6.3 million to account 300 and $500,000 to 192. And then in FY26, no less than 60% shall go to the account 300 schools. The other 40% was going to be appropriated down the line because of all the costs that were unknown that we now know. So now we know, and we can go into, in my professional opinion, we can now go into March this year with a unified number of a structural budget deficit, not saying it's the senior center or the clerk or the conservation or the schools or this or that. To Lucas's point a minute ago, and I think he relayed it, really right now, and to Paul's point, you just see a structural deficit. In my personal opinion, the discussion of like, what gets cut, what's the percentage, here we go, is not where we need to aim the conversation. The conversation now is we're looking at a 3.6 million across the board, and everybody will probably get a haircut, to Lucas's point, if that deficit is not fixed. So while I understand there are a lot of communities that specifically put overrides when people doing research, putting the word school in the ballot question and this, we did not have anywhere near the time to be able to discuss and properly debate that in public. And I think at the end of the day, that engagement piece was a very, very narrow window, and that's just the way it happened. And I do believe that was certainly one of the things that I've heard from people, phone, email, private meetings, across the board throughout the community. And that's why we're doing these sessions, because clearly people felt like there wasn't enough of these questions that you're having and enough discussion. So I just want to take that off the table to make sure people are aware. I don't see any reason why we need to do an MOU. I don't see any reason why I would recommend any split. I don't see any reason why we would carve up the pie. I think, in my view, to maintain the unity that has been built throughout the community, I think we need to just say, as a town, we are in the hole, 3.6 million. That is the deficit. And we knew coming into this year, we knew we were already over 3 million in the hole because we used one-time monies in the budget to patch the budget last year. So we already knew last year what we already knew in June when we revised the budget where that was going to be. I hope that helps a little bit, at least for folks at home, regarding kind of where the splits are and stuff like that, Megan.
Okay, yes, so 2 points there. I think personally, just from community feedback, I would be curious to see where that, I guess, like strategy goes and whether that backfires or not. But that's obviously what these listening tours are for.
Exactly.
Second, I do feel compelled to say that there were tons of folks in the community last year who stepped up to say, we're rushing this, and there shouldn't be a special election for all of the reasons that you just stated. So I think that's important to kind of remember and recall, because we spent $30,000 on this special election. There was all sorts of, things that went into it, and then there was a major divide that came from it, right? So I think it's I just want that on record. There was many people, including myself, who said this is rushed. We don't have enough information. We're not getting it to the public. The public can't, consume this information in the time that we're given, and here we are. So my second, just clarifying question is, so the redistricting savings that were cited, is that for a single year?
Are you talking about in the
Which one?
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
for school or town.
Jamie was talking about just the town side.
Yes, so just for the town side.
I think I'll let
both.
Lucas speak to his, but I think for both, yeah, he just said it. I think those are structural in perpetuity. So those savings, if we wanted to take those savings out, I could take those savings and lower the structural budget deficit in perpetuity. Obviously, in FY27 or 28 or 29, there are going to be probably cost increases on electricity or utilities and other things down the line. Just like he'll see, there's going to be cost increases from collective bargaining, and we're all going to see that in the future. But those are savings that, for the Parmenter closure in the municipal budget, those are savings that are permanent.
Even for Kennedy, even though we're saving now, and it's going to be reused for something else, you can count on those savings every year?
If Kennedy somehow got repurposed for anything other than the ECDC, okay, and say the floor plan was going to be fully used in the future for something else, then those savings would not be permanent in the Kennedy example, because you'd still have to mow the lawns, snow and ice removal, staff cleanup, custodial benefits that go through custodians and stuff like that, right?
Right.
So That's why these assumptions that are there now. But in terms of Parmenter, especially given the fact that the school committee voted the other night to dispose of Parmenter as of September 1st this year, those, like Davis Thayer, those Davis Thayer expenses have come off the books completely the last couple of years. There's still a small amount in the Davis Thayer account just to keep the heat on so the pipes don't freeze and stuff like that. But those savings would be in perpetuity until a future use is determined or until a future this policy decision is made.
Okay. And just with that, if Parmenter is, abolished or taken down and used for the police station, I know you mentioned this later on, but like those savings are then null and void because we then will have at least $40 million that the town, like a bill for that new police station.
So the police station, yes and no. So on the actual cost to build the police station, I don't see any other and I've labeled it in the memo.
Yeah,
I don't see any other, and again, cheap plug, February 25th, if those of you who want to come see the police station building committee's first meeting with the architects on the unveiling of some of the public outreach we're going to do, that's a good night to start. The building almost surely would be a debt exclusion.
Right.
So right now, the 40 million number, I overestimated that. It's probably going to be far lower than that, probably in the 25 to $30 million range based off just off the record kind of numbers. But we're going to see what that looks like. If we have to buy a piece of land, that number is going to go way back up.
Right.
That will be debt excluded, meaning taxes will be raised, just like for anybody else in the room that may not know, like the Tri-County school, like the high school. Like every school in Franklin. Your taxes are raised, and then they sunset. And if you look at the budget model, you can see Keller Sullivan and all the other schools, Horace Mann, are now coming off that schedule. And so your taxes are actually going down on those two schools because now those bonds are now paid off. So the debt exclusion will just be put in, taxes will be raised for 20 years, it will sunset after 20 years. To your point though, and you are accurate, we will need to pay for water, utilities, gas, propane. If we're a net zero building, maybe we don't have to pay for that stuff. Maybe we can use solar to fund that, to do that type of thing. I don't know. But we can't put the cart before the horse. You will need a part-time custodian, obviously. There will be some utility costs. I can't estimate what those are known now, but once we go through the building project proposal, at some point, you're the expert in this, I think by the time you get to what the design is going to be and what the building will be, then we will also have an operational cost of what that would be back into that facility.
Right.
So that probably really won't be for 2 or 3 more years.
Right. But it would be added on to taxes. Like how much was Tri-County? The debt exclusion there?
Well, that's an awkward one because they pay for all the facility. They pay for and Tri-County pays
But
for water.
that landed on the taxpayers.
Yeah, it was like $150 per
between
average
100
household.
Right, but what was the total cost?
It was like $30 million.
Right, so it would be more than that, technically for the police station.
That's
We're
still
looking at.
divided by 13 towns. I just want to be clear, the operational costs of electricity, custodial services, et cetera, will be defined once we know the size of the building, where the building's going to be, if the voters vote for the building. That cost of operations will be in the operating budget. But the cost of the debt exclusion will be in a different category, so they're 2 separate costs that come from 2 separate sources.
Right. So
And
double
some of that
cost.
cost is already in the operating cost because we have a current police station.
Right. But I think it's important for people, in the audience at home to know a debt exclusion is still a tax increase
That's right.
for many years.
Without question.
Yeah, and for 40 million, you're looking at that for many years. I forget what Tri-County, it might be
It's about
200.
for an average parcel.
179
for an
maybe.
average parcel, and I think it was, don't quote me, but there's a website, you can go look it up. I think it was for like a $550,000 house at the time they calculated this. It was an average increase of about $150 a year on people's tax bill for the 20 years of the debt.
But it goes from a low of maybe 100 to 300, up and then back down.
Yep.
So, but as to Jamie's point, debt exclusions, there's an end. Override, there's no end.
Correct.
Overrides forever. Debt exclusion has an end.
Yeah. And then just now that we're on the topic of this, if the police station goes it moves forward, a debt exclusion were not to pass, right? Say the voters say no, we just can't afford anything else.
Yeah.
What happens? Are we on the hook for that 40 million? Do we regroup?
No.
So we would then say we're not going to do the police
Just
station.
not building.
You're just not building it, and it doesn't happen. And right now, you're looking in the budget with Keller Sullivan and part of the Horace Mann bond, you're looking at $370,000 going into FY26 coming off the tax rolls right now.
Off the tax.
All right, I asked that question just because via email you had mentioned we would kind of revisit that, or like we would kind of cross that bridge when that happened. So I wanted to make sure that it was.
I don't know what bridge.
Like I had emailed and said, what happens if a debt exclusion doesn't pass?
If it doesn't pass, we don't build.
We don't
Okay.
build the. We don't build
So
the-
that's a good answer. I
Plain
didn't
and
get that
simple.
answer before.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Plain and simple.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Megan.
Ken Ojuku, 73 South Street. Just one question. I thought it'd be helpful. We've been talking a lot about a structural deficit, and I think a lot of people in the room may know what it is, but I don't think that we all are fully understanding of what a structural deficit is. So I was hoping you could take some time just kind of describe that. What does that mean? That $3.6 million, is that, if we were to do an override and fill that $3.6 million structural deficit, does that mean there's no deficit in the following year? Just, can we talk about what that is and how that impacts us?
Superb question. So right now, the superintendent and I have gone in with level service budgets, right?
Yes.
So if to your question, if the $3.6 million budget passed, okay, then that would essentially fix the leaky roof. And then moving into FY27, we would then need to work within Prop 2.5. Also, I just got to emphasize this, you're also living on our side within local receipts and also new growth. On the superintendent's side, you're also living within the fees that are paid and revolving funds. If people decide, it's not going to happen, that they're not going to pay the football fee, he doesn't have the money to pay the cost for the football program, right? So if people don't pay, it's the same thing with meals tax. If the economy takes a nosedive and there's a major recession, right? Like we saw 5 years ago when the pandemic hit, we lost 25% of our revenue 5 years ago. So that's why the numbers in 2020 and 2021 are skewed. But assuming no unforeseen circumstance, then moving forward, we would need to work within the confines of Prop 2.5. What that really means is, that does not mean, and I think this is hopefully part of your question, that does not mean every single budget is within 2.5%. Because on his side, he has revolving funds that are offsetting some of the costs to services. On the municipal side, we have local receipts that I've explained a million ways from Sunday in a budget document that help offset my salary, Amy's salary, the fire chief. I think his department, 30% of his department, 35% is paid for through ambulance receipts. Okay, if nobody calls the ambulance anymore, not happening, but if nobody does, he's not bringing in revenue and we don't need paramedics, okay? That's not the trend, okay? So when I say live within Prop 2.5, I mean live within the levy of Prop 2.5 without additional overrides. But that does not mean 2.5% across the board. I would like to believe, as we've walked the community through the budget process this year, with this in particular coming out now, you see where our staff starts in September with a 2.5 down the whole column. That's where we start. And then many of the municipal budgets, for example, veterans, conservation, Board of Health, planning, community planning, their expense budgets very rarely are 2.5%. That's why the school department, when you look back to FY19, for example, they saw a 4.98% increase. Why? Because they had cost drivers, not just healthcare, but other issues too, but our expense line items. So those numbers move throughout the entire year. By the time we get to the Finance Committee hearings in April and the council hearings in May, we have those numbers way more structurally baked in. That's the 2 minute I can give you. I hope I answered that for you pretty well, Ken.
Yeah, no, that helps. I just, again, I follow it. I just want to make sure that we're clear on what a structural deficit is.
Right.
Thank you, Ken. And just for people, mainly for Councilor DeLorco, I let Ken speak. I know he's a member of the Finance Committee. I let him speak because there is one member of the Finance Committee who's on the Joint Budget Subcommittee who's not here.
You know you're going to get it from
I knew I was going to get it. So.
He's going to buy you a coffee, Bobby.
Oh, let's not get crazy.
Okay. He's going to get you a coffee.
Please.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Shelley LaQuinta. I'm an English teacher at Franklin High School. So my address will be associated with 218 Oak Street. I want to start by saying it's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to hear all that you're sharing. It's certainly a daunting task in front of all of us, and I'm simply here to lend my voice from, please trust me when I say that I'm more comfortable in Franklin High School in front of 14-year-olds than I am here. So much more comfortable.
It's the opposite for a lot of other people.
And it's in that vein that I'm kind of braving up, and I'm in front of the town here just to lend voice to the importance that I feel it is to fund our schools. As a teacher, it stands to reason that I care so infinitely for the students here in Franklin. And I have to say that the very fact that I'm here in my 14th year in the district speaks to how important I think this conversation is. If there were to be additional reductions to funding of our schools, that very pride that was mentioned in this conversation is at risk. I can't stress enough how important I feel it is for every student, and I teach 125 of them, feels seen, valued, and heard in my classroom. And in order to do that, we have to be mindful of the classroom size. We have to be mindful of the resources that we're funding for these young people. And they're very wise. And they can sense when there is tension around those resources that they so want and that they so deserve. And so I thought I might add a little bit of tangible detail to what further sort of reductions might mean. We have young people who are trying to figure themselves out. The way that they do that is by sampling different subject matter, sampling different clubs and activities. As we stress our budget and we have risk that these courses and these clubs are not run, much like they've been at risk this year, I see these students in front of me struggling to find themselves, struggling to find a place in their community, their high school, and ways that they're going to find themselves. I see the stress on them and in them, and it makes me sad. And I would really, really be sad to see that further threatened, if you will. Additionally to that, I do see students who are not able to stay after school for additional help due to that stress of the cost, possibly, of transport. I do not have this in any kind of authority. It's anecdotal. I acknowledge that. But it is a reality that I would invite the community to continue to pay attention to and to query and to question as this listening adventure is the word I use in the classroom continues. I'm a little off script here. As an English teacher, I do so, as I mentioned, value that individual attention that students get. And I will say that as class sizes grow, and I want my students to be able to write claims and thesis statements, that depends on having one-to-one conference time. And with larger class sizes comes more of a sort of tension there between how many days can I allocate to that practice. 2, okay, meaningful learning can still progress. 3, that's pushing it a little bit. And so then I have to have some tough conversations with myself, what's going to give. I would rather not have that conversation. And finally, I'm a nerd. I love education, I love teaching, and I love being able to come together with my counterparts and cohorts of learning to be able to look at what the most recent research suggests that I do so that I stay current for your students, for our students, and do the best that we can for them. Reasonably, I understand we've had to kind of question our funding for summer work and such, but I would so love for the conversation to return to that kind of conversation and funding for it, because that's how we get to being that school that you mentioned just a little while ago in the conversation. So I might be kind of what they say, preaching to the converted, or like people are probably already on board, but the reason I'm here tonight after a long day that started at 5 o'clock this morning to teach students is because I just wanted on record the passion that you have in this community, and that you'd be funding, that hopefully you'd be funding.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Sure, Jay.
You should have told me earlier I didn't have to stick to the 3 minutes.
Oh, well, you do, Jane.
Oh, no, that's cool. You turn that off. Couple of quick things, and basically because I watched the school committee meeting, and then I heard a few comments tonight, so I'm gonna ask a question to clarify. One of the teachers who did speak spoke about reductions gonna be made again this year. From what I heard when I was at the school committee meeting, there are no reductions, because with the redistricting, you will be able to I hate to say it because they're people, but transpose them from here to there and reposition them. So there are actually nobody leaving except for anybody who is voluntarily leaving, maybe through retirement or whatever. Is that correct?
Well, I can answer that. So the teacher who spoke was, I believe, a high school teacher talking about reductions. The pre-K, K through 8 is where we did the reorganizing.
Okay.
So when I spoke the other night, I talked about 34 positions have been reclassified to meet the model that we have today, right? That includes, we had reduced 3 elementary class teachers, which puts some of our class sizes now are over the recommended limit. So with the reorg, those positions have been used at the ECDC, the pre-K, elementary, middle, and high school to reset the foundation on many of our those drivers. Class size was a huge one. Caseload, that idea.
Right.
In addition, 20 valued staff members received notification that they do not have a job at the end of the year.
And
so
why were they?
Because of the economy of scale that we mentioned, where you put 3 middle schools under one roof. I'll use an example. You no longer need 3 principals. You need 1 principal, right?
Okay, so the reduction isn't because of a budget issue. It's because of the redistricting.
It's a reduction because the school committee made the difficult choice to vote on the recommendation to reorganize, which is very difficult. But what we did is, by doing that, we've now, and the work we've been doing all fall has been around converting apples to oranges, and building new schools and budgets from scratch. And when we put them all under one roof, when you needed at the middle level, for example, you had 2 people doing it. One at, I'll use one middle school and one at another. When you put them all under one roof, you now only need 1 of those people in those positions. But when you spread out over 3 buildings, you have to use, does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, I understand the whole redistricting. Whether I liked it or not is mute right now.
Sure.
But I do understand the work that goes into it.
Yeah.
But the 20 reductions are due to the redistricting, not because of the budget.
They are a result of the redistricting, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think to clarify, the 30 that we lost last year because of the budget is not part of this.
No. The 24th.
So that's where I think there's two separate
I want to
things.
correct, there was someone who spoke earlier.
She just asked about this year.
This
I know, but I just want to make
I
sure.
understand last year, I
Okay.
do, I'm not
Someone said
questioning
30
last year
earlier
right
this
now.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the reductions that we're
Yes.
going
Correct. That
into,
is
now. Those are due to the redistricting, not because of a budget issue. I
Correct.
want that clarified, because I don't want people yelling, and they do, Facebook or in life, well, you don't care about the schools, so we lost 20 teachers. No, we didn't lose 20 teachers because I don't care about the schools. We lost 20 teachers because of a redistricting process that was voted on, regardless whether people like it or not, whether it's a good thing or not, it doesn't matter. But that was the reason those teachers are no longer going to be with us.
Yes,
And
but I do
that's
want
why I
to.
want the clarification.
But I want to make sure that it's extremely clear that if $3.6 million has to be found, those 20 are not part of that equation.
Say that again?
The structural deficit that we were facing of 3.6, 3.8,
Rough.
that will require additional cuts.
Yes.
So
And I'm
that
not
whole
saying-
conversation surrounding whether there is a responsibility or if the structural deficit is not addressed, if the override is voted down, there is not another simple way to plug that hole from the school side. So in addition to those 20, we will be facing substantially harder conversations across the board, I think, in every facet of our budget.
And I understand that. I just wanted clarification on these 20.
Yeah.
The other thing is, another teacher, which I respect teachers, believe me, this is not me attacking teachers, okay, at all. Talking about the children and their clubs, and everybody wanting these clubs to come back. I understand why. But if I heard you correctly, or somebody at the school committee meeting, because it got a little crazy pants, but not all programs are coming back. Even if the override passes, not all programs are coming back, is what I understood.
I think
You
that in
just
some ways
said-
is an oversimplification.
Yeah.
One of the big things that Lucas was able to describe, so if you talk about the academic programs, we've been able to, because of the redistricting, because of some of the different ways that Lucas has been able to build things out, we're able to offer things are available, but we're going to have a higher bar for the number of students that are going to be, so let's say AP courses as a great example. Offering a significant number of AP courses, because we have this time to plan, because we know what the budget is, because we have this, is it 2 months early, 3 months?
It's 2 months.
Feels like we did this
2 months
just a couple
early.
of days ago, so yeah. So a lot of those different AP courses are now offered. The challenge is going to be, we're going to have to look at exactly how many students sign up for their respective courses and then dial back. So in the past, if we had a higher number of teachers, that threshold might be just 10 students, right? So you have 10 students, like-minded, they're excited about something. Excellent, great, we're going to run that course. Now those numbers are going to be much higher because of those reductions. So we can offer when they're signing up. We can say, great, we have 20 different AP courses, but what is actually offered to them, what they're actually taught in the fall, might be 12 courses because we can't actually field enough teachers for all of them.
Okay, what about like the arts?
I think so.
Yeah, let me just go with that one.
Yep. I can handle that one. Yep. So we have in our budget the same amount of art teachers that we have at the elementary. The middle part of that reorg, when you have 3 of a similar role, arts are included along with classroom and everything. When you go to one school and you do a master schedule, you figure out how many you need of those. So there are some economy of scales in there. What I think I want to bring up, the point you brought up, and I understand now, I didn't understand at first. My comment was course selections happening at the high school. I used to be the high school assistant principal years ago. And every course is open right now to kids. And what I noticed last year was there was confusion around certain courses not running because of either budget or was it enrollment.
Right.
So what I made the point and I said to the school committee is, I'm working with the high school administration team now. Course selection's open. You can sign up for any of our APs, right? We were able to do that. You will be able to sign up and put in, but what we do is students really vote for the courses that run based on what they request for electives and things. Everybody has to take English. So what I was saying was, there are going to be situations like we do every year we look at and say, hey, which courses are we running? The principal meets with the department heads and says, this course is going to run, this course is going to run, this one only had 7 kids in it. We're not going to run it. We can't afford to run a class with 7 kids in it. So that one comes offline, but what I want to be clear about this year is if that's the case, I don't want the miscommunication out there to think that that's strictly budget related. Now in a healthy budget, you know what? It's an AP class and it's a high level class and there's 10 kids in it. You want to be in a healthy budget in Massachusetts, in an off year and you only had 12, but you historically have more, you might run that class because those are the 12 kids who need that class in that year. Right. What we're trying to do is just make sure, and I put a note slide, if you want to make a note, slide 17 breaks down the class sizes across elementary.
I have them on my computer.
That's okay, no, I just wanted you to reference, but I made an asterisk next to high school. I put course selection is in process now, because in order to, I wasn't gonna put a number that wasn't real, and it was that course selection's happening, but I wanna be clear this year and really deliberate so that we don't get caught in a conversation, not one that I'm typically involved in until I get emails, but I know that the Facebook conversations can get really down these rabbit holes on, they cut something. And the truth is, if only 7 kids were going to take it, we had to make a change. Okay, so that's it.
Shift, yeah.
2 last plugs, and then I'll stop.
No, you're good.
FAA came up. So we had 15 sophomores who were interested in doing that. Now that's a club back in the day that was like a school within a school, and Shelley's in the room, John Perkins, I see you out there, where you had a school within a school that it could run because you had a high number of students who would move through each class. As that has decreased, we've seen our business department increase, so there's been a little bit of a shift in what students are electing to take, but that got so small, it couldn't support itself within that school. It wasn't that we were going to try to get rid of FAA, which is the Franklin Arts Academy.
Thank you.
But what had to happen is we had to take a hard look, and we were already starting to look at that over time as we modeled it out. And now you've heard us talk about the Career Innovative Pathways. We received a grant from the state to do a full study. There are other schools and high schools in Massachusetts that do this, that look at what are the work-related industry needs and how are you aligning your coursework to fit those needs. I talked a little bit about this last year, but I brought it up again. And the idea is, the excitement here is there's a steering committee happening at the high school that's exploring this option. If we apply for the second part of the grant, it's a larger amount to give you seed money and to say, hey, you know what? Based on our data, we have the potential to do a business pathway. Kids can go 9 through 12. We can align coursework. We can look at courses outside of a business department. Public speaking, an English teacher could teach that, right? You can start to tie in electives and get a better, I don't like the word efficiency when we talk this, but a better optimization or synergy, I don't know the word, but ultimately try to look at, instead of just one academy for arts, maybe there's an arts pathway, but maybe there's also a business one, and maybe there's one in the bio or the medical area, and start to look at how do you grow that, and that's the direction we're moving, but we're in this tremendous change. So everybody is well aware of like pre-K through 8, what's happening. We're also, usually there's we're also working, sorry, usually it's
Just
like Tina or Paula.
Just don't stab him with a
Last point is, we're also working with the high school because they're in the midst of looking at how can they evolve to fit the ever-changing needs of their students as well at the same time. So this all happens if we solve the structural deficit. Because what will happen is the conversation will change. What I put forth was a level service budget that says, hey, if we do this, we can land the reorg, reset our foundation, right? There were reductions. It was tough to do now. Typically, we don't do that until later. We thought it was the best thing to do for anyone not with us. If we know it, we owe it to them to tell them so they can make decisions for themselves as well, and let everyone else know what their role would be next year. So we did that to get that information, shared it so that we had a budget with other departments all at the same time. But I think what I would impress, and I want to just reiterate what you said, I feel like we have to all be in on this as a community. This isn't just a school thing. This is like, we landed where we landed with that budget. There was an economy of scale because of the decisions to unify and reorganize. And this is a chance where I don't think we can afford not to fix this deficit. And I think it's going to benefit all of us. And slide 17 gives you a little bit more, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up and
And then I'll finish.
then you can finish.
If I read your comment correctly, Jane, I think your point is well taken. You're looking for, and the community would benefit from, a very clear dichotomy or description of what staff reductions were due to redistricting, what staff reductions or changes might have been made because of demand. If there's only 2 kids in a club and they're not going to pay for that club and they're moving money to another club, and then what are due to budgetary complaints. You're looking for a Cliff Notes, 1 paragraph, 1 slide, cheat sheet, cut to the chase. Is that what I'm kind of hearing?
Yes, because if we go back to last year,
Right.
briefly, everything was because of money.
Right.
And that wasn't the case.
That's
I'm
correct.
not saying that there weren't some,
Right.
but not all. And that's gonna lead me into my final 5 minutes.
It's not what this says.
Oh, that's broken.
Where's Glenn?
I'm going, but yes, Jamie, to what you
Yeah.
said, yes. Clear cut.
Right.
There's no room for misinformation because it's black and white. Now I'm gonna make a statement. It's not a question. And I've heard this through the last override. I've heard it since we already just started the topics. I've heard it from everybody, from council to all people on Facebook, to all of them. We have to come together as a community. We have to take pride in our town. And we have to fix the problem. In saying those words, all those people who voted no, you're basically making the statement that we don't care, that we don't have pride in our town, and we just don't care about the schools. And that because we don't is partly why we're here. What we're failing to understand is not just because of timing, not just because of dollar amounts of the override that was presented. With everything that's going on in the state, in the world, in this town, from inflation to every tax fee increase. I'm on disability. You know what my cost of living increase is? $30 a month. That doesn't buy milk and eggs today. I have 2 sets of my porch steps that are about to collapse. Can't use my back deck because I can't afford to fix them. My husband's a retired Vietnam vet, correctional officer of 36 years. I take care of help my daughter with her daughter because she's at a minimum wage job right now, struggling to make ends meet. She does really well, but where she can't handle, we pick up. Life is very hard. Some of us voted no because financially we just can't afford it. It will drown us. I was born and raised in this town. I am living in the house I was born in. was raised there, my kids, and now my granddaughter. To assume that I don't care about this town or this school is BS. I am 3 generations deep in the Franklin school system. I started in Kennedy. They redistricted, put me in Oak Street. I didn't know anybody in my neighborhood because of where the line fell. I went through Oak Street to go to Horace Mann Middle School, and then I went to Tri-County. I had Mr. Kalachi as my vice principal, who I loved. I went through this school system, and my granddaughter is now going through this school system at Kennedy School. I see the issues with the school system. It's not perfect. And I know where they are, and trust me, I will be bringing that to light. We're not a perfect town, and we all make mistakes, and I get that too. But to sit here and act like we need to unify, and basically what that means is if we don't see it the way you see it and do what you guys want us to do, not you specifically, but as a group, then we're not unifying and we're troublemakers. We're haters and we don't care about anything that has to be done. We give information out that we're getting, it's black and white in books off the web, and then we're labeled as misinformation. It's not misinformation. It's just not portrayed the way you wanted it portrayed. Because numbers don't lie, and it's in black and white. So please think very carefully about talking about unity and being together and joining together, because what you're doing is you're basically making everybody who did vote no feel like we're probably got a problem because you're basically talking to us. Just think about that for a little bit. It's not always just because we don't care. It might be just because they can't.
Thank you, Jane. Rob?
Good evening, everyone. Rob Vaca, 17 Russell Street. Proud 29-year veteran teaching middle school and at Horace Mann Middle School. Want to thank you for the listening sessions. I also want to thank you for at least the past 3 years of all the information you've been getting out there. I think it's been really informative. It has educated this history teacher on budgets that I never thought I'd learn about, so thank you for all that.
Or wanted to.
Yeah, but they're interesting, and it's been, and you know, I teach civics now, and it's been interesting to see how a municipality works. So, and I've never realized how intricate it all is. So I appreciate all the information you've sent out. Lucas, I can't thank you enough for all that you're doing right now. And I don't know what else to say about that. Could you do us all a favor and try to clarify? As educators, we just lived through, and you did too, a difficult week.
Yeah.
Where we did have cuts.
Yeah.
I don't believe, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the budget and the consolidation are mutually exclusive. Because as I sit through these presentations, and you've mapped it out beautifully about the teaming at the middle school level, and you've talked about it tonight. You need a certain amount of, we have a certain amount of kids that will be at Horace Mann, Franklin Middle School next year, and that number is not changing. And if it does, it's by a few kids up or down. Yeah. And we do have budgetary restrictions and concerns that are impacting the amount of educators that we're going to have. So can you clarify a little bit about how the budget and the consolidation are not mutually exclusive?
So they're not mutually exclusive. I'll say that.
In other words, and I know what you know what it means. They're related.
They are related. That's what I was hoping. That's what
Right.
I was interpreting. So the decisions we
Do you
made.
mind if I sit down and spin a
Sure,
real-
sure.
Yeah.
The decisions. I'll try to keep this as succinct as possible. I know I can talk.
Stand in front of eighth graders.
Yeah. The decisions we made to reorganize ultimately created cost avoidance this year. I have a slide in there that talks about if we did not do the redistricting, we would be looking at today a 7.9% increase to our budget, and it would be a $6.17 million ask and recommendation to do the same things we're doing now with a 3.78% and a $2.9 million. So there is a connection to the decisions made, reset the budget, and we were able, and it was a tough week, Rob. I hand-delivered personally. Okay, that's okay. I saw you. I used to teach. I saw you with your hat on. Is he paying attention? No. We avoided costs by doing this to reset. Okay, that's one thing I would say. What was important, though, and I felt protective about this, was if we're building this from scratch, we need to use criteria. We have our class size recommendations. They're the same ones. We didn't change them. We used the same recommendations that we used last year when we presented our budget to make sure if we're going to build this, are we accounting? The benefit is there's a slide 17, Jane, the one I told you about, that there's this many students that will be in kindergarten. We need 15 sections. If you divide that out, you're looking at class sizes of 20 to 21, for example. So I explained, if 15 kids move into the district, you're going to move that class up one. If 15 kids moved into the district and say 7 of them ended up at an elementary school now that had 2 sections, you'd be looking at moving that they're already at 24, they'd be at 28 and 29. So we've created stability on that front, right? The design. But this is connected to the budget. But to Jane's question, what we did is by resetting, we've determined that there is economy of scale that's not the same as when we failed the override and we had to make forced cuts in a system that couldn't support the cut. What we've done is proactively now is built it from the bottom up and said, hey, we redid it, we reshuffled the deck, we've rebuilt the schools up, we're in range of the criteria expected, the state law of 500 kids to 1 school nurse. If you divide that up, we went through all the criteria and said, if we build the schools this way, there are 20 positions we've identified that we can eliminate from the budget now to start and build back so that we offer the same level of service. And in there, we included, we added a music position back to the middle school that I talked about. That was cut over the cuts. We've added back some elementary teachers to bring the class size back. So I know the question would be, I'm waiting for it, it'd probably come from a different venue. How can you go from 5 schools to 4 and need 3 elementary teachers, right? I can see it coming. Because we have class sizes of 27 right now. We have teachers teaching at a higher level. So we needed 3 across the whole district. We needed 3 at the elementary to get those back into, depending, if it's kindergarten, it's supposed to be 18 to 20, 22, and then 20 to 24 is your 3rd grade through high school, right? Those are your ranges you want to be in. I want to credit the middle school too for the schedule that Mr. Williams is chomping at the bit to present to the middle school teachers around how teaming. I've been meeting with local area superintendents. We have a cohort. Everyone is considering looking at different ways to do pulling like world language out of the unified arts rotation. So you increase your seat time with the arts, they're not competing, and if you do a full year of world language in 8th grade, you're now getting 140 hours of seat time in a year, as opposed to 40 hours over 3 years if you pepper it in like every 4th day you go to, right? So there are benefits that we're finding from this that we're excited. There's a lot of excitement around this. But the reality is the decisions made helped us reset the budget. A failed override forces cuts to a system that wasn't ready. And I think that's the pain from the summer. Yep. This is a matter of saying we've rebuilt this proactively now in the budget. We're recommending it. It's the only year, I just want to say next year, the system's set. There won't be another time in my career that we're going to look at to be able to come to a table and say, hey, we found 20 extra positions and we can cut again. We've built it now to reset a foundation that we'll use to move forward from now. Does that answer your question, Rob?
It does.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, it made sense before I asked the question.
Okay.
Because you have explained it.
Just really quickly, to answer your question clearly, yes, there is a relationship, okay? But I just want to juxtapose your comment with what Jane just said. From more of a macro, higher level of where I stand. The pandemic pushed a lot of change onto us that was accelerating. I've said this at numerous meetings for years relating to what I see in the community. Many people who live in Franklin probably are aware of this too. I said it at the beginning of this meeting about affordability. When you ask for an override, or a debt exclusion for that matter, in my view, and I'm pretty knowledgeable about this statewide, you have to show the taxpayers to the best of your ability that you have squeezed all the juice out of the lemon as much as possible. And I go back to what started when I started as a deputy with the chief of police, knew for years there was no way he was ever going to get the staff that he needed. And he came to us and said, I want to change the schedule of the department, okay? And the fire chief, we did this throughout all of my tenure. We've reformed virtually every department. And I think, unfortunately, while I know costs have gone up with special education, I'm not, I understand the costs for public education have gone up, but things like the enrollment decline over the last 15 years, and I think the work that Lucas has done in the school committee, particularly Paul Morano with special education about keeping those kids in district, the work that they're all doing now is the work, unfortunately, that, to be blunt, I think everybody knows this, my predecessor and I have been jumping from the top of the roof saying we should be doing this stuff for a long, long time. And it's really at the heart of it. And I know people may not believe this, but to what Jane's point was, there are a lot of people I listen to, that the council listens to, that other members listen to, that can't afford all this. The police station issue is not about a big battle in the community about Davis Thayer and Parmenter. My single goal is that I don't want to go out and buy a new piece of land. And I'm doing that to try to actually take that cost so we don't have to, like the town of Needham, buy up a dozen parcels at market rate in downtown to build a police station. At the heart of all of this, even in the MOU last year, in the best attempt, which I understand didn't fly for a lot of people, we have to show that. So I think what the superintendent just said was really well at the end. Yes, to your point, no question, there's an affordability piece. There's a budget piece that's a relationship there. But what he's showing the community, and the school committee is showing the community, is that they've gone through the very extraordinarily dark and hard and emotional work, which you all know, to go through redistricting. Just like the chief and I went through a very painstaking process to get our police officers to realize that if you change the shift schedule, you have a better shift schedule for your quality of life. But we took that $600,000 in overtime savings and reinvested that right back in the department, and we do not now have to ask the taxpayers to raise taxes for that. I cannot, to be clear, compliment the school committee or the superintendent enough. I'm up there next to his office. None of us sleep. I know how hard it is, and I know how hard it is emotionally on your end to see that. But I think this is a real eureka moment for the community, where I hope that some that voted no on the override, and we're never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be everybody, but maybe some of the people that did vote no, maybe they'll look at this next round and say, these guys really did do everything they could to try to just make those savings enough to reinvest in that. And by the way, part of the missing element on his presentation the other night, which was excellent, was those class sizes he's showing are way more competitive today than they are yesterday, right? And some of the cuts that did happen over the summer and last year are going to be able to be restored. Mm-hmm. Those are huge victories for the school district, huge victories for the community, and maybe that sends signals to people that, wow, they really did do the hard work necessary to try to save a few bucks. So when we go to the ballot, for those people that are on the fence or can't afford it, maybe they might reconsider that the next time around.
And I'm not, to clarify, I am not questioning those efforts.
No,
Understood.
I know.
Understood, Rob. Please.
Thanks, Rob.
Yes, Dasha Badera, 35 Marvin Ave. I have a couple of questions. My first question is if we could just get further clarification on hold harmless, because it seems that many people amongst the community have absolutely no idea what it means. From my understanding, it looks like it's something that went in play in 2017. Legislative forums also appeared around the same time, which obviously opened up the opportunity for people to talk about what was going on in the community, within the schools, and give, at the time, Karen Spilka, Senator Becca Rausch, or actually it was Richard Ross and Jeffrey Roy, an opportunity to come and answer any questions that anyone in the community may have. However, it's a topic that keeps circulating in all of the town meetings, and I think if anybody is consistently watching these meetings, yes, you're hearing the terminology of hold harmless go back and forth, but again, I'm talking to people that are paying attention at the same time. They have absolutely no idea what it means, which is dramatically concerning. And I hear that, yes, we might have a structural plan in place with the redistricting, but truly, if we were to lose our hold harmless, everything conversation-wise is opening right back up again. So can you or somebody here please speak to that specific topic directly?
Yep. So the article that was in the Franklin Observer this morning is an excellent beginner's tutorial on hold harmless. So just to try to save the night so I don't have to go into a entire workshop session here on hold harmless. Historically, that article was overwhelmingly accurate. Hold harmless was actually stemmed out of Chapter 70 reform in the early 2000s. And the reason why those legislative forums happened, and I was fortunate enough to work for the senator who was the chair of the Education Committee, and I was there when that provision came in. And basically, when they were doing Chapter 70 reform and changing the formula, there were districts like the city of Gardner, city of New Bedford, and others that had seen a huge rapid population increase at some point in their tenure, and then they had seen a huge enrollment decrease at some point. Franklin was one of those, actually. And Franklin had benefited from the fact that they were a hold harmless community like the city of Boston. And ultimately what that means is you're not penalized in the Chapter 70 formula for having a rapidly declining enrollment. And so in a sense, it's a safety net. And that's part of the formula. To be very clear, the reason why those legislative forums focused on that were referenced in the Observer, and I think most of us, many of us were there. I know Mel was, I know Bobby was, I know Tom, a bunch of us were, really was because the hold harmless number was going up over the years. And the reason why that was not going up was back to Sue Rohrbach's point many times ago at forums. The town of Franklin's share of what you could pay for locally, your ability to pay, was dramatically going up, meaning the income of the town, the median income of our ability of our affluence, and the land values in Franklin past 2000 to today have gone way up. And as part of the formula, Chapter 70, more affluent land rich and affluence money rich, you get less money. So the city of Lawrence under Chapter 70 generally gets like 90% of its school budget paid for through Chapter 70. The town of Weston probably only gets 5 or 10% because it's the richest district in Massachusetts. So there's an equity piece baked into Chapter 70 that's there. And there were cities and towns that were held harmless because of their declining enrollment. I've said this many times, nobody should be hurt by these feelings, but I've just got to say it to your question. Back 20 years ago, the town of Franklin, to make up for that hold harmless provision, probably should have been doing micro overrides because our ability to pay and our affluence through land and money, income, was going up, and we should have probably been doing 600,000, 400,000, 800,000 back in 2002, 2007. There was an override that did pass in 2007, which was trying to address that. There was one override that was successful, and they were trying as a community, I was not here, but we were trying as a community to address that. The recession in 08 or 09 wiped that away. So you kind of made some progress in the 2000s toward that home harmless provision, and the recession in 08, 09, and 10 and the rebound from that wiped all that progress away. Then you get to the declining enrollment in 2008, where the district was at its peak of 6,500 students. And really from 2008 to 2009, 2010 on, really is when the town should have been trying to address this a little bit more with some of those micro overrides. You could go back and look at the budgets from many, many years ago. Mr. Nutting wrote about this. Maureen Sabolinsky wrote about this. I know Miriam Goodman gave presentations at every school committee on this. You fast forward to 2016, 17, 18, and now like the city of Boston and some other municipalities in Massachusetts, that number was growing and growing and growing, and it became cause for concern. That's when you can kind of pick up that Franklin Observer article that was in today, which was very well written, very well documented. And that's when Senate President Spilka, Senator Ross, Representative Roy, if there were other elected officials at the time, they were holding forums on how to address that. Why was that being discussed? Because the legislature then was talking about Chapter 70 reform number 3 called the Student Opportunity Act, to which the town of Franklin was never going to benefit from that.
Minimum aid.
Okay? And the reason why the Student Opportunity Act was not going to benefit us was because the real goal of the Student Opportunity Act from a legislative standpoint, not Franklin, was to address underperforming schools. So you're trying to address the issues in Winchendon, Fall River, Holyoke, severely underperforming schools. And so the formula was not going to benefit. What the Observer article did not mention was that Senate President Spilka and others were very clear with the community, and she and Rep. Roy delivered on this exponentially, was in the Student Opportunity Act, the Senate and House prioritized charter school reimbursement, and they prioritized other areas that were going to try to benefit the town of Franklin's financial issues in education at that time. Meanwhile, at the same point, our ability to pay, because we were becoming a more affluent district, and now we are truly a much more affluent district, okay, our Chapter 70 numbers, as illustrated in Governor Healy's budget now, is only at 1.23%. The only reason why we're seeing a net increase is because the assessments of kids going to the charter school in Tri-County are going down, and so therefore the penalty provision in the formula is not hitting us as hard. But the ability to pay is still going up because the land in this town is skyrocketed. The median income in this town, your aggregate wealth model, which is your ability to pay, is becoming higher. And as a result, through the formula, now we're up, I think, John, in that 12 million range on hold harmless. I've said this for years. I'm well documented on this, that hold harmless is a big concern. That being said, this is not an issue that can be solved in one Hail Mary pass. It is not an issue that can be solved with one override, and it cannot necessarily be resolved all in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. This is something the community is probably strategically, I think to Sue Dusnap's point earlier, is going to have to look down the road and say, okay, as redistricting becomes mature in the next 2 years, are there more economies of scale, or are there other micro investments that need to happen to address the hold harmless? Where the rubber meets the road is where Senate President Spilka said earlier this year that she is going to sponsor a Chapter 70 formula commission. Not this year, not next year, probably legislatively deal with it this session. That commission will take a year to meet, and as somebody who has been through that before, I can tell you this. When they make a recommendation, no district can lose, because any district that loses, no matter what your political party is, you will vote no on that bill. Hold harmless is an example of that. The reason why hold harmless exists was because those lawmakers were going to vote against the law in 2006 when they were doing Chapter 70 reform. They were all going to vote no, and therefore Chapter 70 reform was unable to pass because those districts saw a huge declining enrollment. The good news, I think, also is I think our district enrollment, while projected in the next few years to stay and dip maybe a little bit, I think is now actually stable. Yep. And I would expect in the future, we have now landed the plane from the 1990s where you had all the modulars and you had these huge spikes in enrollment up to 6,500 students. I would think that you're now going to be a district between 4,400 and 4,800 students, roughly in that range, for probably another 10 years or probably the rest of your career. And so you're probably now in an enrollment stabilized because the population of the town has stabilized. I know the townies in here, you remember when it went way up, when it came down, it was a big, it was a big peak and valley. But really, the town of Franklin is largely built out at this point, and I think you're going to see a stability in that. And so that is the best 5 minutes I can give on hold harmless. Anything else, I would encourage you to take Mark Abrams' Chapter 70 class.
Bring your coffee.
Bring your coffee, and you can learn the intricacies of the formula. That's the best I can do in 6 minutes, Dashy.
Just to recap, so let's say things did move forward with Chapter 70 getting reworked and all of that, and in 2-3 years, we are looking, in fact, for hold harmless to change. Now, let's say, yes, we also have enrollment that is stabilizing and or potentially growing. I mean, will we outgrow the schools that we're in? I've heard as well, too, that there could be the possibility that if Parmenter is the location for the police station, I've heard in enough meetings that there could be a future development growth for a school built there as well, too. So while I understand, yes, we need an override, I'm not going to ignore that. The concern is, how do we set up our residents truly over the next 5 to maybe 8 years. Let's say someone moves to this town, they have kids that aren't even in the kindergarten, okay, and they have an idea of what the town might cost. But there are real issues that are impacting us at a larger scale, not just in our town, that realistically, what I'm truly hearing is year after year, we're gonna be in these conversations, and it's gonna require all of us to pay more money. There is no way around that. So I guess, to my point, with the Chapter 70 funding and the hold harmless, if it's looking like $12 million, could that be 3 years from now that our operating budget now has to take money out of that, cut fire, cut police, go straight over to the schools? And, you know, again, what does that really look like for us in the next 5 or so years?
So the first step, that's a fantastic question. So the first step is to pass an override, because that actually then will help our quote-unquote local contribution, and that will reduce to some degree our hold harmless number. It is not a dollar for dollar. So if the 12 million number goes through, okay, or if that's hold harmless today, don't immediately calculate and say, well, a 3 million override means now we're down to 9 million hold harmless. That's not how it works. But I will say that it sends a huge signal to the legislature that if you do an override and you're starting to address your local affluence and your ability to pay, that will give whoever the lawmakers are at that time certainly good fodder at the legislative level to say, we are addressing this. Number two, by passing an override, you are increasing your local ability to pay. So that will lower the hold harmless in the formula at some point. Number three, I would encourage everybody to not jump 2, 3, 4 years down the road. The whole world is going to change again. And I mean this sincerely. We need to deal with this issue now and then recalibrate. And I think one thing that got lost in last week's presentation that the superintendent, that the school committee members asked that was really important to generate was this redistricting is really a turning point away, okay? It's turning a huge corner away from this constant conversation every year about budget layoffs, Rob and Jane, about actual budgetary layoffs, right? From a conversation more towards complete stability and rerouting the conversation more towards a strategic plan for the future and a discussion with the community. I think that's when your point, Dashi, is really valid, right? Where 2, 3, 4 years from now, if we can get an override and fix the leaky roof right now, we can really check off several boxes all at once. And then you recalibrate in a year or two, get back into this discussion, see where the legislative issues are at that time, see who the legislators are at that time, see where the state budgetary issues are at that time. And most importantly, engage and be a part of the Chapter 70 Commission, if that even passes, right, which is still a big if, and see who's on that and see where we go from there. And then we have to really look at what those Chapter 70 formula changes are. When we're talking at the local level that redistricting is the hardest thing to do at the local level, I guarantee you the hardest thing to do at the legislative level is Chapter 70 reform. That is by far the most challenging thing those 200 lawmakers have to do and what the governor does. So I would just answer it, let's take it one step at a time and not go way down the road too far with hypotheticals. I think the hypotheticals are very dangerous, but seeing as how you brought up hold harmless, one of the real values in this override conversation is an override will start to not only address the budgetary structural budget deficit, but if you're concerned about hold harmless, the override will help us move forward on that hold harmless issue and will put us in a better position.
Okay, thank you. So I personally, I mean, this makes sense to me, but my focus is talking to people, no idea. So that's where the real reality comes to play, that no one even knows what we're talking about here. So that tells me that there's a disconnect amongst the community and they're not able to properly plan because they have no idea what we're even talking about. So
this 10-minute clip of my soliloquy,
yeah,
show them that.
Totally. And I think the Franklin Observer putting out information is, again, just getting people engaged that this is a real topic that people do need awareness on within the community to be a part of this larger conversation.
Just before you move,
ahead.
can I just say,
Yeah.
January 15th, there was a primer done for the FinCom, and it was specifically on this topic.
Great point.
And there's a slide deck and a YouTube video where Ms. Malati, our school business administrator, and Dr. Dutch co-presented about this. And there's a slide on there that we created last year that shows the hold harmless, and it's like in an equation. It's the easiest way to explain a very complicated situation, but I thought I would just plug the January 15th FinCom meeting is a good resource for more, in addition to this snippet, which probably could be cut and pasted right where that FinCom thing is, just put it all in one spot.
There's your 30 minutes right there.
Of what you could read, so just to hit on that. The other thing you brought up was enrollment, and we've looked, and Jamie is correct on the stabilization.
Yeah.
What was good about Dr. McKibben is he made some projections prior to even COVID that ended up being pretty close. And then we had him redo his numbers post-COVID to give us numbers to be able to get to the decisions that were made in the spring. And the way the schools are organized now and the numbers, we know that the schools that we have and the way they're set up can sustain what we know. Right now, I think they're anticipated between now and 2030, about 100 to 150 elementary students total coming through by that time. There's also recommendations that we have on our website for the reorganization that you can look at. And what we're doing is we're putting a flip book together that's like the big ideas. So if you don't want to get drowned in multiple slide decks, we're trying to give like a flip book that's just like, what were the big things that happened? What was the deal with, how did they decide again how elementary would be divided and whatnot? So I will put that out.
Yeah.
And it'll have the enrollment figures in it. We'll be presenting that on the 4th as well as part of the budget conversation.
Okay. Or do you want me to stop?
No.
Okay.
Where's the mic?
Okay, another question that I had. So one of the difficulties that I saw personally with the override last time around is there is mistrust amongst the community, significantly mistrust. And one of the factors that helps me better understand what we're talking about in regards to mistrust is that there are people on these committees that have no intention of engaging with certain individuals within the community. To me, that is not doing your job, because your job, whether you like what someone has to say or dislike, is to listen to the community. So going to that point, I just want, first of all, Lucas, I think you are a huge addition to Franklin. I have seen a significant difference with you as opposed to Dr. Sarah Ahern. And I think that needs to be acknowledged and recognized. And because of that, you know, my family actually feels comfortable enrolling my oldest school kid into the Franklin Public High School this fall. So I owe a lot of that to you being due diligent, doing your job, and making sure that you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's. So I thank you for that. Regarding other boards and committee members, very hard for me to say that I can trust you, because there's many of you that have no interest in engaging with me. And I am a representation of many individuals that might need to say things that you might not want to hear. So to that point, I am dramatically concerned when this agenda came out and there is a particular sentence and or paragraph on page 6 that is highlighting, and it says, since the pandemic, the town has also witnessed a fragmentation of information and increased efforts to discredit the organization in our institutions. The misinformation circulating has never been so conspicuous in our time serving the town, and this is a trend across Massachusetts. I think what COVID has done is it has allowed people to ask questions and start having healthy debates. As a representative of this town, it is your job to listen to the people and create safe spaces, truly, to have debates. So as someone that has asked questions, try to come before the mic. Yes, again, you might not agree, and I might not have all the answers. I am never gonna say I do, but it is very disheartening knowing that there have been opportunities since that override to today that could find ways to bridge the community truly with yes and no, and that really has not been acknowledged, accepted, or understood. So as someone, again, I am very thankful. Again, Lucas, I think you're doing a phenomenal job. But when I'm understanding that the school committee members are interested in running for town council because there is a particular situation that is going on in this town that has definitely affirmed a lack of trust, to me, as a community member, that significantly concerns me. So that said, it is hard for me to say I know for sure that this money is going to go over to the schools. It's really hard for me to agree that that's what's going to end up happening. Then knowing that there could be other issues that are going to be presenting themselves over the next 3 to 5 years. Again, if the school committee members are interested in walking away from their seat and trying to run for town council because there's a particular reason why, that is deeply concerning for me. So as someone that is consistently coming forward to voice my concerns, finding ways to create balance genuinely, I'm confused on why a paragraph like that would get placed in the agenda for the first joint budget listening session.
That is my sentence. Not his, not the school committee's. I wrote the memo.
I know.
Amy and I wrote that. I have heard a tremendous amount of concern from all walks of life, yourself included. These are not about, misinformation is not like whatever Jane says to people. I don't do any social media, so I don't know what you're talking about. I just know that you've referenced it a few times. I have heard concerns from you. I have heard concerns from a variety of sections of this community. I interact with veterans, seniors, teachers, elementary school parents, high school parents, college professors, young people, old people, of all walks of life. People call me all the time. They talk to me all the time. One of the biggest concerns I hear in this town, if not the biggest, is misinformation. Not, by the way, to be clear, specifically to Jane at all, but just about the volume of misinformation. And to be honest with you, Dashi, and to be very clear tonight, I've said this to many people who are standing here right in front of me. No one reads anything. I'm actually appreciative that I know you read this, because there are a lot of people that read nothing. They ask the same questions over and over. I write the same stuff over and over. I regurgitate it. It's a waste of time. It's all in the budget documents, over and over. If we are to stabilize the budget, and if we are to stabilize and bring fiscal solvency to our school committee and our town departments, I need people to read the material. Melanie Hamlin, Councilor Hamlin said this recently. People say, well, where's the school budget? And she made a great speech recently and said, I went and looked for it online, and there it was, line item by line item, and I read it. I can tell you, I know exactly who doesn't read this, because people email me all the time and they go, where's your budget model? Or where's your this? Or where's your that? And I go, you obviously haven't read the agenda because it's right there. So when people come to me and they say, people are misinformed, social media is blowing up, there's all sorts of commentary on it, I gotta tell people, those are opinions. But I think we are in this doldrum as a society, not just in Franklin and probably everywhere, where people are exercising their free speeches and they are giving opinions, but those are being misconstrued as facts, and they're not. To your point about the budget, I have laid out the model as is today, and I said earlier before you got here, Dashi, that, you know, the 3.6 number is not final. It's going to be within a stone's throw of that. 2.92 million is right here in the budget model going to the schools. So we should not be confused about the override and where the money's going to go. The budget's right here. So let's not make up another world of what's over here. Let's read the very easy to read 4-page budget document that's right there for people to read and go, okay, well, 2.929 million is going to go to the schools. Oh, okay, 68,000 is going to go to the salaries in the custodial department. 2,600 is going to go to purchasing to that department. 200,792 is going to go to the Franklin Police Department, and so on. The facts are right here. Myself and Lucas, I know we pride ourselves on this. Our staff are incredible at what we do, and I think that statement in the budget document is to address an overwhelming amount of commentary I have received, and I think, I don't want to speak for Lucas, but I believe confidently he has received this as well. We are spending, by the way, an inordinate amount of time, okay, correcting people in information that is already right under people's noses, right on the school website, right on the town website. And we have tried to create, I think, this committee, a safe space for everybody to come out and exercise their opinions. We should have done this, and if I would have had more time, I would have loved to have done this in the fall. But I think the chair believes too, you know, we weren't going to have local aid numbers. It wasn't as robust as a conversation. That's why we strategized to have these exactly right after the governor's budget came out, so we could really talk a more robust conversation with the community.
That's why we moved up our timeline.
That's why you moved up your timeline
so
too.
you have like
So,
some of the
yeah.
details around the budget.
Well, I think the failed override in many ways light a fire under all of your asses to be like, you know what, we have to actually move this budget up further because we do need to articulate things out to the community in an effective manner. The point that I'm trying to make is, you know, when you write things like this, yes, I think everyone here knows that I will read things, I will watch things, I will send emails, and I will be persistent. I think that's a great quality of mine, and instead of overlooking it, use that to your advantage and thoroughly do your job. And that is part of listening to the people, even if it's not what you want to hear, and every single member on every single board needs to actually do their part. And that is not what is happening. I genuinely think that if this override passes, Lucas, I'm giving you almost 90% of the credit. I know there's a whole team behind, but I will say, I think you have done a phenomenal job with our Franklin schools, and that needs to significantly be acknowledged. You answer emails, you care, I know you care, I don't believe you have a personal agenda. That is not to say for everybody else in this town. We're working towards building trust, that it's mindful in the words that you use. There's a ripple effect. So what I'm saying is this word, misinformation, I understand you guys might be hearing that you're getting misinformation, but is this really the impact that is going to give us the true trust to grow community together?
What's your view?
Okay.
Can I just?
I know I'm carrying on.
Yeah, we're getting
I would
late
say- I just
here.
wanna-
I think we're gonna.
That's fine. That's fine.
I think I would just say we have worked really hard as a full team, all of the department heads. You know, we all are advocating for our departments to make sure they're the best, and so that we're all delivering the best quality services we can provide this community. And I think my experience has really been around just a cooperative group that really wants to see this happen. And I know, Jane, this isn't to trigger you, but the idea of unifying and coming together under one cause to see this deficit fixed is really a real thing, and I think that's a real honest effort that we're all making. And I think we did learn from last year, like what worked and what didn't. And I think there's a concerted effort to try to come together to do that. So just from what I can say is, and the work we've done to try to get this and build this budget, and the work that Jamie's done in this round, and the support has been appreciated.
I'm gonna stop. I'm just going to take a few seconds here because this is the whole reason that we started this process back in August for exactly what you were saying. We can't go to the houses and pick people up and bring them here or go inside their house and turn on the TV. But we can provide an opportunity for the community to be heard. That's what I tried to do by starting having these listening sessions. There's 5 more, and I hope we have twice as many people each time. And I hope they come and express their concerns just like you did. But this is the whole reason we're doing this, is to get factual information out to the public so that the public can make an informed decision on fact, not on fiction. And I think we've worked really hard to try and make this process as resident-friendly as we possibly can. And I think that certainly was my goal in putting these together. And I think that tonight was a great night. We've been here almost 3 hours. And I I think there's been a lot of good information put out there. I think there's some concerns, obviously, that we've heard and we will take back and we will listen to. I think it's important for everybody here to understand, and I know we talked about, you hear structural deficit all the time. I'd just like to add a little phrase to that. It's level services, structural deficit. So, and what that means is clearly exactly what it says. It's the current level of services being provided by the school department, the present current level of services provided by the municipality, whether it be fire, police, DPW, facilities, whatever, the structural deficit to continue to provide that level of service currently sits at 3.6, 3.7. And as Jamie and Lucas have both said, that deficit is probably going to change a little bit. It's not going to be huge one way or the other as we move forward. And I know for those of you who weren't at the last session, but I made, and I'm going to look at Ruth Ann, because I made a promise back in September that we would put that the council would have in front of them a ballot question decision in February. And I'm taking a half a step back, because if you notice, the listening sessions go out into the beginning of March. I'm going to move that to the March meeting. That question will be there, whether it gets voted or not, but we will be prepared. After having 6 listening sessions, this body, this joint budget subcommittee, will be making a recommendation to the council, who has the ultimate decision as to when an override goes and what that number is and how it's structured. But that's the plan. And I'm sorry, Patty, I didn't mean to, okay, all right. Again, we've been here for 3 hours. I appreciate everybody's time and just coming out to listen, to get factual information. And I think this body is determined to make sure that we get the facts to as much of the community as we possibly can. And I ask every one of you to, if you come to the next one, bring a friend, bring 2, bring 3. Because the more people we can get factual information to your point, the more we can get the community to have the ability to make an informed decision when that override comes. And I don't disagree. There are people out there that can't afford to pay another dime, and they should be voting no. I totally understand and agree with that. But we are in this situation, and we're going to move forward with that. Does anybody have anything to add?
People are bringing friends. Can they bring coffee?
Donuts, too.
Can we open the bar next time?
Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Non-debatable. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
No, you